Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that maybe there should be a warning on the door. Everything you say, maybe even think, will be recorded.
There it is in writing.
Okay, you're on YouTube and then report.
Achoo. Oh.
There's your warning.
So if I just wave like this, then is that okay? Better than doing the little hand raise on the Zoom?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Okay, City of Philomath Planning Commission meeting called to order. Can we have a roll call?
Yes. Gary Connor,
Here.
Gianna Bernardini,
Here.
Darlene Rose,
Here.
Joseph Sullivan,
Here.
Peggy Yoder,
Here.
Ruth Causey, here.
Okay, thanks for coming. Our agenda today is to take a look at and discuss various documents in support of our rewrite of the comprehensive plan chapter on economic development. And that's the totality of it. So we're gonna launch right into that. Can you give us an introduction, Mr. Workman?
Sure. Again, Pat wasn't able to be here tonight to help pull this information together for everybody and get out. But he's going to be watching from home and catching up and hopes to be with us at our next meeting. What got sent out was a whole list of stuff, everything from the two documents from Eco Northwest, both the strategies document and also kind of the additional tools that weren't necessarily recommendations, but were other tools that were available for the city to consider. The city's economic opportunities analysis, that was the bulk of the packet, so hopefully that didn't scare everybody too bad. That was the nice thick 80+ page that hopefully looked pretty familiar to you. Went through that at the end of last year and first part of this year to get that approved, mostly end of last year. And so hopefully that was worth a revisit, some of you. For Commissioner Rose, I think it was probably the first time going through that economic opportunities analysis in full detail, so she had a little bit more reading to do. And then also just the ordinance that got approved, and then we've provided some sample policies from the cities that we've looked at previously, either for the citizen involvement chapter or for the housing chapter. So Monroe, Redmond, Sherwood, and North Plains can give you some variety of sizes and locations, just to give some examples again that we've used in the past. So tonight, kind of thought we would follow a similar pattern to what we did for housing. Recognize, I do want to say, I know Van couldn't be here tonight as well. He had a family engagement to be at, so he couldn't be here either, but he will be watching the meeting later and hopefully getting up to speed so he can be with us for the next conversation. So all that said, really hoping we can follow the same pattern. If we want to look kind of high level of kind of where we see maybe things that are most important to each of you, for as far as economics chapter goes, for what we want to see, we kind of did up the housing policies. Commissioner Sullivan kind of kicked that off, and stepping back and just looking kind of high level, what is it that you see and you would like to see, and make sure we capture that at some point throughout this document. So I thought that might be a useful, quick first exercise, and then to either jump in at your guys' discretion, either jump right into the Eco Northwest policies or jump right into our existing policies. My recollection was looking at Philomath's existing housing policies was probably the most fruitful discussion we had on the housing, because we were able to eliminate some of the policies we didn't think were really relevant, identify ones that needed some tweaking, and then really see what was missing, and then added some more information. That's where we pulled from the other sample documents on what to pull in there. So this may follow a similar pattern. It may go off that rail at some point, and we'll kind of adjust as we go. But really, it's an opportunity to pull in everything that you've been reading and looking at individually and kind of share with the rest of the group and make sure I can capture as best as I can. And then we'll follow up with the second meeting. That'd be the first week of May, and be able to bring that back to you to take a look at and see how close we are and see about scheduling a public hearing once you've had a chance to look at that. And so I guess to kick it off, Chair Connor, maybe if you want to go first and loop around on kind of big picture, maybe the 2 or 3 most important things to you as far as the economic chapter that you want to make sure get into the final document, if you're to that point.
I guess probably not exactly at that point, but I felt like this chapter was a little more nebulous to me than the housing.
Mhm.
And from the examples, there's some that are very brief. It's like we want this, 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 and this, and this, and really no concept of how to get there. And then others were much more involved. I suspect if we're all on the same page that we were with housing, that we'll want somewhere in the middle where we have a little bit of specifics about how we want to get there. And as far as where we start, my first thought, yeah, we should definitely go through the old version again just to see what's there and what maybe is relevant to pull forward and just move on with some other things. But like some of the stuff that's 20 years out of date regarding the couplet things. But I kind of felt like the report, the economic analysis report, was a little more pertinent this time to what we need to have in our chapter. It might be possible to just take the headers of that economics analysis report and make those sections of the economic chapter, whereas I didn't feel like that was quite feasible last time because of kind of the way things were worded and the way that report was broken up versus this report. Not that I'm just saying that's a possibility, and I'm definitely interested in hearing from everybody.
So you're saying that the one from Echo Northwest, the first policy will be land supply.
Yeah.
Okay, just kind of sticking
I
here
felt
and
it was-
tweaking it.
Yeah, I felt it was easier to at least take the headings from that than it was from their version of the housing chapter. But that was just me on my first read, so.
I like that you want us to go through, there's some still viable things that are in the current
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
There's some that really
It's not
aren't.
quite like changing the Constitution, but we should look to the past.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Commissioner
so
Sullivan.
that sounds like a great framework. And I kind of like what Mr. Workman said about the format we used last time with the previous chapter and kind of gathering some thoughts and then putting them together and giving them a chance to wordsmith it and work them in. I feel like with this many pages of stuff, we probably all have some like general questions and things that we want to get out of the way. Beyond the general questions, if we were to go through like even the report page by page, it would probably take well more than the even lengthy 4-hour meetings we sometimes have. So
Yeah.
I guess I would like to suggest that once we agree on the basic format, like you're talking about, maybe going heading by heading, or which of the example chapters that we like the Great Plains is really simple, and then there's kind of a couple that are a little bit longer. Once we have that, if we did the same thing we did last time, where each of us wrote down on our own time the 3 to 5 things that we really care about, sent them to Mr. Workman, he could massage them in. That would also give the people who aren't here a chance to fully get their say in. And then when we came back, we could essentially go over the things we really care about versus waiting through probably the 90% of stuff that maybe we aren't passionate about. If we did that, and I don't mean to be overly optimistic, but we could be out of here in 15 minutes.
May I say something? As I think that's a great idea. I think maybe for the way that I like to understand what's going on in people's minds is to actually hear them. The danger of we send it all in, and since we can't see whatever other people send, we can't see, then it kind of leaves, I just kind of feel like it just leaves me in the dark. I like being able to hear somebody's, like, your reason why you think a certain thing,
Yeah.
instead of just the fact of this is what I think. Well, why do you think that way? And I don't think it's a bad thing that we can be influenced by each other.
Sure,
I think that's probably part of,
So I totally agree, but I don't think, I think it's a good idea to just go around and let us talk about those things, but then give us an opportunity to send in something in writing so that we can, not put it on Chris to put our words,
Yeah,
our
I
spoken
guess
words into writing, but also give the other people opportunity, like Joseph said.
You raise a really good point. For me personally, when I look back over how it worked last time, I had a few things that I really cared about. We sent them in, Chris wordsmithed them, and when it came back out, I had a chance to compare and see how close it was. And then the things that I really cared about, I kind of made an issue about. Now, we could revise that, and we could say, okay, maybe that didn't work for everybody. And we could write down the things that we really care about, and then maybe the next time we come back, we read them out loud. That doesn't mean we couldn't have sent them to Chris beforehand or not. I would have no problem reading out loud the things I specifically care about. The thing that would give us the most advantage is mostly just kind of collecting our very specific thoughts. When I try and think and talk at the same time, it kind of takes a long time. And then there's a lot of kind of questions and stuff like that. If I have a chance, and this is just me, to write down my thoughts, I usually put them in a lot more compact form because I'm just getting down to the nitty gritty of what I really care about. And then I'm happy to read that, or we can talk about it or whatever. But I feel like it's when I go like item by item and then, we all have questions, we kind of talk about it. I don't feel like it necessarily helps get closer to anything that I care about or anything that you care about. It's mostly just kind of words. And the more we can just put on paper, even though it, requires a little more homework.
Can I propose that we kind of prep ourselves by going through kind of point by point the previous comprehensive plan, just to kind of discuss which things are pertinent still and which things are not. And then maybe in the current policies,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe go through just the headers of the economic analysis. I forget what the title of that one is, one of the attachments.
Economic policies attachment.
Yeah, and then by the time we just talk about those general topics, we each might be a little better prepared to spend a minute tonight talking about what's important to us.
Yeah,
and then see where we're at.
That sounds great. Would you be okay with putting a target time on that? Like we're going to do that for X number of minutes, or just we kind of have something to shoot for.
I would think, and I can shoot from the hip and make up numbers that end up being horribly incorrect. I think we could spend 20 minutes going through the old version.
Yeah, sounds lovely.
And maybe about the same, just looking at the headings of the economic analysis report.
I see us being able to get to a really good place in an hour.
Okay.
I think we could do all of this easily.
Yeah, and then another 20
let's do
minutes.
it then.
And then,
An hour from now, which we already spent the 15 minutes. Sorry about that,
Yeah,
Joseph.
well, that's great.
Number one.
So number one, which attachment was that?
Attachment D,
D.
current economic policies.
Darlene, can you hear okay? Darlene,
probably not.
Yeah,
can you hear okay?
well, there's a bit of background noise. I think it's paper shuffling probably, and I'm struggling a little bit, but getting most of it, I think.
Okay.
Well, that's not good. Maybe she can read the transcript.
Yeah, it has got closed captioning. So attachment D, current economic policies. This is what's in our comprehensive plan today. The following policies identify guidelines for the city and county economic development efforts. Number one is about retention and expansion of lumber and wood product employment within Philomath, encouraged by adequate land zone and public facilities.
I'll just jump out and say number one and number one is lumber related. Number two is, and everything else about lumber related as well, so we can diversify. So it's really about have enough land for lumber and everything else, which is similar again to housing, which was have an adequate supply of land sufficient for business needs.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I guess I'll refrain from that. We can bring that up later. I want to hit 20 minutes.
All right, 20 minutes, we're having cookies.
I,
How about that? Is that okay?
I was
Yeah.
thinking like we could just go through and look at, are there any ones we want to just X?
Agreed.
Or should we just continue to go through one?
I think some of them will come up that we can just very quickly say X. I don't
Okay.
think that's one or two though.
No.
That's the shortest version
Carry
of what
on.
I was going to say. All right. Communicate with others. I think we're not going to X that. We're going to communicate and partner with Benton County and state and regional agencies. Number 4 is compatibility of land use, industrial, and setbacks, and vegetative screening. And we've certainly done some work on that lately. So that's certainly something we are and will continue to do. I can't imagine anything else. Number 5, review applications for industrial development shall be coordinated with DEQ. I feel like this is one we can X because that's what we're going to do. It's in the state laws. It's going to be in the specific thing. I don't think it adds to the comprehensive plan chapter to say things that are eminently obvious or non-optional.
DEQ, Department of State Lands, Department of.
Yeah, if this was going to be comprehensive, there'd be a long list of agencies there. So
Yeah, so to ask what might be kind of an obvious question, we've gone through like 5 of them. We've talked about 5 of them. Out of those 5, 2 or 3 of them basically kind of hedged around lumber in some way. And I love Philomath heritage in lumber. I think it's great and it's really part of who we are. Looking forward, I don't see any future in which a significant growth in lumber happens in Philomath. Now, it seems important that we kind of respect the businesses that are doing it and the heritage we've got and make sure that we don't do anything that would hurt the future of lumber in Philomath. But realistically, in the future, are most of our efforts going to go to try and protecting a vast tract of industrially zoned land in the hopes that a mill will come in? Or do we think that maybe there's some alternative futures? And if so, we might want to tweak a couple of these paragraphs a little bit just to reflect that reality.
and that's the discussion that I chose not to have.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to say that out loud, and if anybody hates it.
Why
they
is
can-
that?
Because to really discuss that at length, I think would take 20 minutes on that bullet by itself.
Yeah, well, that's
But
fine.
that's-
I just wanted to say that. I don't feel like we have to necessarily go
But that's a
depth.
good conversation to have. So
Yeah.
do we do that next time?
I thought
or
the
are
same
we-
thing. It's like,
should we talk about
why
it now?
should we single out one type of industry?
Because it has been the foundation of this town's economy for a very long time.
And this is a political
Not
body
now.
here, and there's politics, and I think and there's a big segment of the population that is employed in that industry, and I think
Sure,
it's
or was.
might be.
Right.
Oh, there still is.
Sure.
That some people are going to get the idea that the current city government is trying to run the timber industry out of town. That doesn't take much to generate that headline, and I don't think it costs us anything to leave in the word lumber as far as future industrial development, timber industry, because that piece of industrial land can be purchased and developed to do, to build, plastic widgets or anything else. We're not making
Or wood
laws or wood widgets or electronic
Robots
widgets,
Yeah.
robots. Yeah, who knows? So yeah, I think we ought to have that discussion deeper.
My point was just 1 and 2, if nothing else, could possibly be combined into a matter of we want to
Yeah.
have adequate supply of land for current and future industrial uses, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I don't think you hurt anybody's feelings by not specifically naming any one of those, but if we wanted to give a nod to the timber, again, I don't think it hurts either, but we don't necessarily have to discuss that further tonight. But
Right.
my point was, I think those two could be
You
combined.
tighten it up.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like I can say this kind of thing out loud, mostly because I have always been extremely pro timber, and the people that I know work in the timber industry, and I think there's a lot of stuff we had in the past that was great, and if some of that came back, that would be great too. I'm just trying to be honest with ourselves, and I feel like it was a little
For
bit
sure.
harder to do that in 1997 or whatever when the original thing was written.
Absolutely. I wouldn't write it again like this,
Yeah.
but I also would be careful not to make it read like we're moving away
Yeah,
from timber.
absolutely not. Totally agree. I think we're on the same page there.
Okay. So back to number 5, does anybody disagree about trying to be less specific
That's fine.
when it would be very hard to be exhaustive and complete regarding regulatory requirements?
If we're going for conciseness, then yeah, it doesn't need to be there.
I agree.
Number 6, public facility improvement projects shall be programmed for development in areas targeted and needed for industrial and commercial development. So this and several others talk about the need to get out in advance of industrial development in order to support that. And I guess to me, that's one of the things that I have the biggest questions about, or I guess lack of education regarding the city's role in spending city money to make industrial land more desirable for
They used to move in.
Industry.
for industries to
In
come
hopes
and
that they
purchase.
will show.
in hopes
Like
that
build
they'll
it and they
show
will
up.
come.
I think this is the biggest question about this policy, is how aggressive the city of Philomath and the citizens in Philomath want to be about encouraging industrial or commercial or any other business development.
Mhm.
And how do we push, and in what ways do we push and not push to make it desirable? We're not going to come up with a huge tax incentive to bring a professional sports stadium to Philomath. Big cities do crazy things to bring in industry and commerce, and a small city does less. So I really don't have a good feel for what a city the size of Philomath typically does, or what sort of sideboards are usually put on that sort of activity.
Yeah, and I could provide you with some really good examples where I've seen what I felt was an appropriate, not just what I felt, but what I've seen as an appropriate level of investment that has been done in partnership, not necessarily to lure an unknown entity to town, but to
Yeah.
help a known entity that's saying, hey, if we can get some help, we can come to town and make this work. And where a city has been, put themselves out there, putting infrastructure in place ahead of time, providing, acquiring grants, acquiring loans, and then flexing its investment potential to help acquire or help a business come into town, get a business come to town. But I've seen a lot of cases where cities have been maybe one step more proactive than that, and just, again, putting a bunch of infrastructure in the ground, hoping to lure somebody, and they never come, and that infrastructure gets older by the day.
Right.
Every day it sits there and isn't used.
Right.
Whether it's being used or not, it gets older, right? And so there's good case studies on both of those examples. And so I think there is I can also point to cities that do nothing and see no results, right? And so I think there's an adequate, or there's an appropriate amount of proactiveness that the city would want to have, but it should be done, pretty intelligently and in partnership rather than just going at it alone.
And I feel like I'm seeing in the city's existing comprehensive plan, and even more so in the economics analysis, a great big shopping list of things that the city could do that there's no way we can afford to do it all. And it just, I hate putting things in a comprehensive plan that we're never going to do, and or probably even shouldn't do, not going to have the money to do at population of 5,000. Right?
It would be, I think what Chris said makes sense, and also what you said makes sense. Like, it's nice to have some of those knobs to turn, and at the same time, we don't want to just fill this document with a whole bunch of random stuff that's never going to get used. Especially the more it's predetermined in advance, the harder it is to fit a future solution. Having said that, since we aren't yet tasked with writing any sort of code around it, we're just kind of setting a theme for the melody. It would be interesting to give our future selves, or the future people in this commission, some ability to use some of the things in that shopping list. The thing that I have in my mind is if, for example, the city had some authority to grant temporary tax incentives to people who brought in jobs. So say for each full-time equivalent job that a business brought into Philomath, they would get $1,000 off their taxes that year for a maximum of 5 years, or something like that. Like, just put some kind of crib sheets on it, but leave the specifics of how that would be administered, or under what rules it would be judged for kind of the future. So specifically suggest that some tax incentives might be helpful, in the direct pursuit of bringing jobs in. So the one thing we really, really want, I think, is jobs, at least certain kinds of jobs, and we're potentially willing to trade some tax incentives for that. We can talk about the details on a different day.
So how does that work? I mean, I would assume if we give somebody a tax break, the lack of taxes that are gonna be coming in are gonna come from somewhere, right? You know, so where do the citizens fit into that? You know, it's like, well, this is, I mean, am I correct? Would the city council make a determination of where that $20,000, $30,000 incentive is going to go, where the money is going to come from to
Well,
give them this, or what kind of break?
But if
Or is
it's,
that how it works?
if it's a new business, it's just
Right.
new revenue that's not coming in, that's postponed.
Exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, because they're still paying for flushing the toilet and turning on the water. And this is new. If somebody said, hey, I'm going to bring in 10 jobs in some desirable sector tomorrow, yes or no, do you want it? You're still going to get the SDC fees from the development that they do. You're still going to get the water fees and the sewer fees. But whatever taxes, additional taxes, there would be a break on that temporarily.
The money would actually be coming from the industry itself.
Yeah, it'd be new.
So can I put a pin in that right there and say that what we're discussing right now is really bullets 6, 7, and 8
Okay.
in the existing plan, and that, you know, I don't know if we want this language, but those are concepts that are going to stay in our economic development chapter, that the city's going to do something about making sure that there's some level of development in the city that allows for industry, that it'll be encouraged to expand the tax base, and that appropriate incentives can be used.
Oh, that sounds great.
I just wanted to make one point with respect to infrastructure. Given that there is so much of the existing city that needs new infrastructure, I would think that people would be adamantly opposed to providing infrastructure unless, as Chris described, there was a known entity coming in, you know, like the infrastructure that was extended
For sure.
or is being extended for Northwood. Thank you.
Yeah, as a matter of policy, what might be helpful to capture in this area would be that as the city updates its master plans, we want to account for industrial zoning, commercial zoning that may have higher uses or higher requirements of those utilities. And so we'd want to make sure that our master plans, and I don't remember if it's on this list or not, but we want to make sure that any of our master plans that are done account for needed infrastructure in industrial and commercial zones.
And that's the way I read the word programmed in number 6.
Right, and I don't care for the word programmed, but that's what I read as well. I mean,
And yeah, it could be definitely, that can be it can be interpreted a lot of different ways. So we should work on that language, but I think we're all on the same page with that. Yeah, so number 9, that's a very specific zoning decision that doesn't seem to be appropriate for a comprehensive plan.
Very specific, and also isn't that the nature reserve? I forget what it's called. So that's
It's in that area, but the area described is that whole big dark purple and light purple in the top right of the zoning map.
everything north of Main Street and east of 19th Street.
Yeah, all the way up to West Hills.
Which is predominantly large tracts of industrial property that are covered in wetlands.
Yeah. And a little bit of timber here and there. And
Is
then
that where
also a
that
few
old
houses.
wigwam, isn't there an old wigwam?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the north end of Clements Mill Road.
I don't particularly care for clause 9. I don't think it helps.
Yeah, I don't think that level of specificity is appropriate for a comprehensive plan.
It is mentioned somewhere in the Echo Northwest though, isn't it? It seems like.
Well, yeah, there's.
Yeah, in the
but-
industrial lands.
But
Okay.
that comes, after we develop our guidance document here, then we sit down and decide what to do with the map. It's a pretty strong arm to put something like that in
In the comprehensive.
the
plan.
comprehensive plan.
Well, somebody 30 years ago felt very strongly that it
Yeah.
should be in there.
Well,
Yeah.
isn't it still the largest area of industrially developable land?
I was gonna say, I mean, but the thing is, without it, there's nowhere else to put any of those. So, I mean, I understand why they're like, we need to earmark some
Yeah.
chunk for big things, because obviously small things can go anywhere. There aren't that many places big things can go.
Right.
Kind of gets covered in number 1, number 2, right? Was have
True.
appropriate amounts of.
So it's
land
redundant.
For industrial commercial space.
That's
So, and
true.
that's always going to be the question, is how specific are we going to get about how we want to implement these things?
We lumpers or splitters? Lump.
But I guess if it's decided that, yeah, we are gonna keep that 237 acres for that. I mean, would it still just be appropriate? But, you know, I see both points,
Yeah.
because
no,
it is so specific for
Well, I think,
comprehensive plan.
and I think this next bullet illustrates that point exactly. Number 10 on the next page is, it says areas designated for industrial development are also appropriate for low intensity commercial uses, offices, warehouses, and other similar non-manufacturing uses. But I think what that concept does, it allows that great big piece of property to just be split up and piecemealed.
Right.
So that's a planning decision that, you know, is always going to be debated until the end of time about how to allocate the different uses, right?
Yeah. The other thing that's a little problematic, not to muddy this more, but is the city doesn't own any property there. It's all privately owned.
Right.
And so I have a little bit of a hard time dictating what the comprehensive plan is going to be for that property that's privately owned and could be divided up into little bitty pieces regardless of what the city was going to say, unless the city was going to implement like minimum lot size for an industrial property, right? Like
Right.
no smaller than 20 acres or so, unless you're going to put in some size provisions in there, this type of language doesn't have a lot of teeth to it.
Mhm. Either way. So all that to say, I think 9 and 10, we're going to have a interesting time discussing how we want to discuss those issues in the comprehensive plan.
Well, doesn't the city don't we kind of do that in other areas? You know, somebody wants to put in a triplex, you know, in a zone, it's their property, and we say no. But is this property here, we don't have a zone that says that nothing less than 200, 200 acres. You know, so I kind of agree with Chris on this. It's kind of hard to dictate to somebody what they can do if it fits within the zone that we would designate it to be.
But this document will guide how we change all those zoning regulations.
So do I understand it correctly? Are we going to have a zone that says
Large
a
industrial.
large industrial zone and it's going to be 237 acres in this?
We could write a comprehensive plan that said we want to reserve our industrial land for large industrial developments. And then after we're done with the comp plan, we could write a zoning ordinance that said you can't have a lot size smaller than whatever in this zone. And so we could, but I'm not suggesting we do. I'm just saying that's why we're having this discussion.
So the alternative to number 9, which says this specific area is going to be reserved for large tracts, you could just say, again, maybe in cooperation with number 1 and number 2, we're going to have land that's available. Some lots will be reserved as large tracts, others will be allowed to be smaller tracts. So, I mean, it may just be an extension of what types of lands are we going to have available for industrial and commercial use.
We could kind of combine 1, 2, 9, and 10 in a way. Concept.
I think it all ties under land availability, right? I mean, if that's the overall topic, is the goal is land availability, then under there you could have several different objectives as to what land availability means.
And just like all economics, you can argue every side of it. I mean, you can say that our big bet is to get a nice big industrial development and create a whole bunch of jobs, or that we're going to develop a lot quicker and a lot better if we have a whole bunch of small startups spinning off of OSU developing a great big industrial area that they do all kinds of things. And those are decisions that whatever we say or don't say is going to influence.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Honestly, I think for me with most of these things, the ones that I'm not sure about, there's still an incentive for me to not touch them or leave them. Not because it's logical or like the smart thing to do, but just because it's been that way for 20 years and nobody's died, and so I'm afraid to touch it, you know? But the reality is, if somebody said, in the absence of this document, hey, Joe, do you see that big area up there? What would be the greatest thing for Philomath in that spot? Pick one, and one of the options was like, 150 acre giant industrial plant. I wouldn't actually pick that as like my first choice. I'd say,
Right.
well, maybe a park with some neighborhoods with some like light, maybe some light industrial stuff that.
By park, you mean office park or industrial park?
No, not like a park,
Theme
Like park
park.
like a nature park. Yeah.
Nature park.
The only reason I'm kind of like, oh,
Okay.
we wouldn't want to change that is literally just because it was on this piece of paper for the last 20 years,
Yeah.
25 years.
Well, that's what comprehensive plans are about, is to put a vision forward about what
Yeah.
somebody wants. And now it's time for the city of Philomath to redecide what it wants through our discussion, and then a
Yep.
public hearing, and then us voting, and then the city council doing the same thing.
Just one quick thing that I would like to say. I was going through some very old paperwork, and back in March of 2019, Joseph presented us with a visioning, wanted to go have us do a visioning for, involve the city, involve us, involve the citizens, and it just never went anywhere. How much better we would be right now. We would know what the citizens think if we would have done that 3 years ago. That's all I'm saying. I'm sorry we didn't do that.
I appreciate that, Peggy. But here's a chance to kind of.
Well, this process is kind of a piece of what was suggested, right? That's what we're here to
There will
discuss.
be a
And that's
public
what and that's what should be the topic of our public hearing, right? And if it's not, let's go in that direction.
Sounds great to me.
So we're halfway through this list and we're at 20 minutes.
Boom. Turkey time.
No, we're halfway through the list.
Good
This-
job.
He needs a sugar fix.
I didn't even have time for dinner. I was just like
Oh,
rushing
okay. All right.
past.
Well, eat a cookie in front of us. That's okay.
No, wait.
Where did those cookies come from?
My
It's
daughter made
daughter.
them.
Daughter.
Yeah, she's 11
Really?
years
How
old.
old? Okay.
They're
No, she-
I
real.
don't need anything
She's a high
8 and
volume
under.
cookie cooker, so they're great.
All right. All right.
Move on so we can eat our
So
cookies.
number 11, again, is a very specific discussion of the development along Highway 2034 on the east end of town, on the north side of the road, kind of from where the new apartments are and through the real estate office and the rental place and
Which is it.
cabinet factory and all that we're really kind of going that direction.
Well, the retention of open space at the old Wyoming mill site, that's been determined, right? That's now the Levin development.
Mhm.
The Willamette site is not Lebanon.
Food site?
The-
The Willamette site is not Lebanon.
East of that.
It's farther over.
Close to
coming in.
east of the Scout Lodge.
Oh,
But it's,
It's behind the Bashful Bob's.
North of Bashful Bob's.
Okay.
And the existing mill building that's still there. That's the
The
one.
existing mill building is still there.
okay, so this is still open. For
This is actually,
whatever.
in my opinion, this is kind of describing the, what was it called, Chris? The goal of the Mary's Peak Natural Resources Interpretive Center.
Mhm.
Can
Oh, wow.
we point to the map where it is? Or
Oh, yeah.
I'd be happy to point to it. I just want to make sure I get this properly.
Our apologies,
Thank you, Ruth.
Darlene.
Darling, can't
Darling.
see what we're looking at.
Sorry, darling.
I'm
You
trying,
You know what Willamette Industries is at, right? So this is Lebanon over here,
Right?
and this is, right here is the entry. The old mill site is in this area right
And
here.
the Scout Lodge is kind of up and to the
Oh,
right.
Scout Lodge is up here.
Oh, all the way up there, okay.
The old log pond is right in here. The
Oh,
mill site is in here.
Okay, so when they say open space at the old Willamette mill site, that part of that old Willamette mill site is still,
It's privately owned.
but it still exists. And it's not something else yet.
To a certain extent, the Scout Lodge has achieved some of this.
Yeah. Mhm.
I guess I'm just a little confused because I used to wander around back there and I remember, I thought that the mill basically stopped at the eastern edge of what's now Lebanon. So, I mean, it probably doesn't really matter one way or another, but I feel like the mill site proper is, that just that part of it doesn't really have any bearing on anything anymore. We could probably strike it.
Well, but the first half of that paragraph is discussing the type of development that would happen along the north side of
Yeah.
Highway 20.
No, that's fine.
Orderly development, that doesn't tell me a lot.
No.
Yeah, that's a little odd.
Well, I think it's.
I think it means like not like boulevard.
The next sentence, the most important one's consolidated access points, right? So you're talking about some
That's
type of a
Probably the most
industrial
significant.
park of some sort. So you've got one entrance that's going back and feeding number of businesses back in there, as opposed to individual lots, all with highway facing properties that are going to create traffic concerns and everything else coming and going.
Well, doesn't ODOT have a say in how many driveways and stuff we have going off on Philomath Boulevard?
They
I mean,
do.
wouldn't that be a big influence?
Well, but we could get up to their limit, and it would be a whole series of driveways and roads. But right now, it's roads with a couple of driveways. So our zoning and what we plan to do could influence how that appears
Mhm.
and feels as you drive by.
And I think that's an important thing to do because that is a very
agree.
prime piece of land, which I feel like if the wrong thing happens along there, I think it's going to have a very detrimental effect on the appearance,
Yeah.
the gestalt of the town as you
Right,
enter it, if
right.
there's a bunch of
Right.
ish. I was confused by promoting the acquisition or retention of open space. How do you promote the acquisition of open space? I mean,
You could put it into a land trust, or you could designate it, and the city could acquire it and designate it as a wetlands.
See, that's what I was thinking it meant.
okay, thank you.
I mean, I
Thank you.
actually like this. I would like to see those wetlands preserved.
Absolutely.
Well, and I would like to have an attractive stretch along the highway there rather than just, piecemeal constant development with maximum ODOT allowed driveways. It's like they are doing it like still exists there. There's some grass and some trees that are kind of manicured in a certain way. And if they do things behind, that'll be a very different feel than if they take those out and just put businesses up against the highway.
Right.
So it's the kind of thing that, again, zoning has the power to control.
Well, we've all driven in through cities that seem like, I think it's Lincoln City. It just seems like it stretches forever. It's just forever. It goes and it's just buildings and driveways and it just goes on. I think they pretty much stick with their 25 mile an hour, at least. It seems like most people do, but it's been a long time since I've been there.
So
But
the
I don't
question
think
is,
I think we want to avoid
so
that.
the question is, do we want to talk about the map in the zone, in the comprehensive plan? Do we want to get that specific in a comp plan about area by area? I mean, I think if we have, and this goes on to talk about, the highway and how it's treated and all that. So I think some of that language would be appropriate, like we said, but
I mean, there aren't that many places in town that are big chunks that are undeveloped. And for that reason, I think it is appropriate to get sort of specific about how, at least what we don't want to happen to those chunks. I think there's a danger in being too vague or not saying anything about those places to have these unintended, like, oh my God, look what just went in there. And then everybody retroactively, we need new zoning rules to keep this from happening the next time.
right.
So you think promoting in the acquisition and retention of open space is a good thing to keep in there?
Personally, yes. To me, one of the things that I like the most about Philomath when I first saw it was this notion that you're in Corvallis and then you're heading down the road and then it's open space and then you hit the little tree stump and you're like, now I'm in a town. And without having that open space with those the sort of ash swales and the open areas of undevelopment, you want that contrast. Now I'm in town. Before I wasn't in town. Now I'm in town. Even if it's within the city limits, I feel like it's a really aesthetically lovely thing.
It defines
to
downtown.
have that.
Downtown
Yes,
versus.
Precisely.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just, and things like having a mini storage things. I've never seen one of those that isn't just a bummer and an eyesore, like in every town where you see them. They take up huge amounts of land. They're just boxes. I mean, I get it. People want a place to put their stuff, but they're never anything you're happy to see. And so if we can do anything to prevent that stretch of land from being nothing but,
A string of boxes.
That's a really good point. I wonder if we could encourage people to have some sort of a visual barrier or something, because given the fact that we already have a storage place there and it's not going anywhere, although I completely agree with everything you said, if we could write our code and our chapter to specifically encourage the creation of like lines of trees and things like that, visual, open and green spaces, it might make it so that we can keep that sort of welcome to Philomath thing that you're talking about.
What if we have portions of this economic development chapter that have, this high level generic sort of conversation like the first page was, but then have a section of it that talks about specific locations and areas and features on the map.
I like that very much.
So that-
we put them all together.
So that we put them together,
Contrast.
we kind of have some bullet points. It'll have to go through several rounds of us and hearing and city council and hearing, and that'll help develop kind of the concept for whatever we're doing with the
Yes.
zoning map.
That way, whenever we get to one of these things, we just say that's in the club. That's
Yeah.
a group of
Right.
things that we'll talk about in a
Right.
detailed session.
Some of these examples, they were, pretty detailed in their comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and I by mixing that with all of the high level overarching goals, I think it dilutes the effect of being able to go to a bullet list when it's time for us to make changes to the zoning map. I like pulling it out separate so that it gets the attention that it deserves, and so that it doesn't detract from the overall goals, because I think the way this is written and the way some of the examples are, it kind of jumps back and forth, and I just didn't like that format. That's all.
So number 11, the feedback I'm getting is we like a lot of these principles, but not necessarily the specific identification to the location. So I underlined frontage along Highway 20 and 34 for consolidating access, open space, looking for internal traffic circulation, controlling freestanding signs, requiring landscaping, et cetera. So those are all principles that I'm hearing
Yes.
we agree with, but not necessarily only limited to that specific site.
Right. I
There's
think when
gonna
we
be more.
when we go away, we should probably all propose locations that we want to specifically address in the comprehensive plan, like maybe down at the Y at the other end of town, or whatever it is that we say is a region that we want addressed. I mean, we've done it very comprehensively with our downtown core through a couple of different projects now, but we can kind of have concepts for the other locations in town to guide us when we get to writing the zoning. I think that concept covers the next few bullets also. So like looking at 12, it's downtown and parking. 13 is what's going around the college. 14 happened, right?
oh wait, did 13? I wasn't, what exactly was that referring to about improving the grounds of the college? And has that been done in the last
I
20
don't
years?
think it's ever been addressed. I mean, I haven't seen the city actually promoting activities at the county, at the museum.
Well, there was a meeting here a couple weeks back, and there was a presentation by a consultant on, what was the title of that?
It's the area-wide plan.
The area-wide plan. And one of his ideas, he had some ideas about the ways you could develop the green space in front of the college to work for having festivals or events or things.
Really?
Yeah.
There's still a lot of question over how much of that would be doable because it's a historic building. The question is, a historic building, is it a historic site?
Right.
Whereas the lawn, you wouldn't be able to
It's
have
a
the
lawn.
lawn. And one of the comments I'd heard was,
It's a
even when that
historic
tree
lawn.
was planted, we kind of had to ask for forgiveness after the fact because we put a tree where there didn't used to be a tree for the Christmas tree lighting ceremony and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there needs to be some more exploration there. But the concept, you're right, was pitched out there that that could be more of a gathering spot, that big front lawn area, if it was improved upon to allow for more pedestrian use other than just the grass hillside.
Mhm.
But it has to be explored with a lot more detail.
Wait,
Is that what that referred to? Number 13 referred to originally?
I think this was written at the time when the building was being purchased and renovated and becoming the home of the historic. And this says County Historical Society. It's now the Benton County Historical Museum. So
Yeah.
I think this predates the acquisition of the property and getting it to where it is today.
Parking lot
So
may have
can
not
we-
even been paved when this was written, right?
Yeah, that's kind of my
Can we
thought.
eliminate that or change or modify it to talk about what you were saying about to develop it further?
Well, I guess
more
what I'm
detail.
saying is that we should put everything that's specific on the chopping block and then talk about what we want to put back in.
Oh, okay.
That's where I was going.
That's gonna
with
make that very, very short and sweet, much shorter than any of these.
Oh, we haven't even talked about the other document yet. This is the first of how many
Yeah.
attachments?
I just don't want, I kind of like to pinpoint it, but, I'm gonna, go with the majority here.
No, I said we need to pinpoint it even more by putting it in its own section.
Yeah, and it seems like I see it when it's taken out of the comprehensive plan, it kind of
No,
lessens the
I said
importance
in
of
the
it.
comprehensive plan. I think we ought to propose the locations in the city that we think belong in the comprehensive plan
In bullets,
in bullets.
okay.
So that right up front, we have the big statements that say, provide for
Have enough
land
land.
and
Right.
do all these other things and encourage whatever.
Mhm.
And then we say, and specifically, these are directions we'd like the zoning in the city of
Okay.
Plymouth to go, whether that's 19th Street.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
The Philomath 200 project?
And this should be 2000. The 14 is just so problematic with all the regulations in floodplain and wetlands and everything that goes there. Unless we're going to, and I'm just saying this literally, unless we're literally going to dam up the banks of the Marys River and not allow it to go south ever, there's no sense in putting any money on trying to get any closer to the river with development. I mean, all of City Hall and civic buildings are already in the floodplain.
Yeah.
So really you're talking about encroaching even more into the floodplain in order to have this connection to the Marys River. And I just think that's in direct contrast to some of the things we're trying to do with protecting those areas.
Mhm.
Can I ask a really quick question, because you just reminded me? Is the road to the park ever going to get paved?
11th Street?
Yes,
It's
all the
up
way
to-
in.
It's up to you,
Where's the
John.
park?
You can put it in here. I'm just
Well,
kidding. I'm just kidding
I mean, that's a
little bit, but,
public, I assume that's a public works thing, but I don't know who.
It's probably a money thing more than anything. It's just
Well, I'm sure it's a money
It's
thing.
just a low
Yeah.
priority because it's got
Okay.
limited people driving on it, and
Yeah.
the use is pretty limited. Even if the number of people who go to the park, you're driving to the park on a gravel road. So priority wise, it's pretty low.
Okay.
Slows people down.
Do you want them paved?
Well, the potholes are a bummer.
They are.
I drive in there a lot and I'm always like,
It's true, it wouldn't
It's
necessarily
just-
have to be paved, but
if the potholes were
if the
filled, that would be
potholes were
great.
filled, especially the
Oh,
really,
yeah.
like, the ones that go down to China. and
But I
back
mean,
up.
they come up, like they fill them periodically and then about
I get
45
food.
minutes later, they're back. And I'm like, oh well.
You're not gonna get your cookies, you keep going down this road,
Sorry.
I'm just agreeing with John.
The ones on 9th Street are even worse.
So number 15 is all about the couplet. I think we can just strike that.
Kill it.
Yep.
I like the first sentence.
I was gonna say.
Somebody can propose it back in. Sure, we can have any statement like 16, right?
Sure.
But we can update that to say that we have to incorporate a lot of things that have been said about the development of downtown.
Yeah, again, what I'm hearing is you're saying have a specific section that addresses development in the downtown core and pull these different policies into that section kind of.
Well,
You took them bullets.
a section that talks about development of specific locations within the city, and the downtown core would be one of
One of
them.
those ones.
And really all it would have to say is probably the intro paragraph from any of our downtown streetscape project or any. I mean, we've got a whole bunch of examples of language that just say we're going to make our downtown core whatever it is.
Is 17 currently required?
What was the question you asked, Ruth?
If 17 was currently required.
No, we don't require any new development in the C1 zone to provide parking.
This is interesting that after all these years that it's just been ignored by
Well, I guess that begs a question as to whether we should.
right.
Well, I think there's different standards for different areas. Again, I think the downtown core would be different than if you get out to further outside the downtown area. I think then you would definitely want to require the on-site parking as opposed to parking out on the highway, right? So just depends, but in the downtown specific area, I think the focus is to provide as much on-street parking as possible and leave the off-street areas for development of businesses and redevelopment of those businesses. I mean, the specific example is the Dizzy Hen sat for sale for years and years and years and couldn't get a sell on it because any redevelopment of that property was going to trigger the requirement for additional off-street parking. Well, the Dizzy Hen's got a neighbor to the side and a street to the front and a small little section in the back. And so I worked with, I can't tell you, half a dozen different property or developers that looked at that site and said, well, I could fit 2 more parking spots in the back, but if I'm going to put an additional, say, apartment upstairs, that's going to trigger the need for more parking than what I can provide. And so many developers passed on redeveloping that structure until the city did away with that requirement for off-street parking in the downtown area. And once that provision left, it got purchased by Dizzy Hen and got redeveloped, and it's been a thriving restaurant ever since. So those parking restrictions are problematic in the downtown area if you want to see these older buildings get rehabbed or redeveloped into something useful for that retail activity. Again, I'm not talking about Dollar General comes in, well, all of our people are going to come by bike or by foot, so we're not going to provide any parking. Well, that's different. That's outside of the downtown core, right? They have to provide their parking, but you do have designations in that downtown core where we don't require it. That I think makes a lot of sense. We want to encourage people to be downtown and parking on the street and walking and biking or getting to their locations otherwise, other than parking right in front of it.
That's a helpful example. Thank you.
Yeah.
But then you have like soft shoe. So there's a lot of, is that really considered outside the core? I mean, it seems like it's within the downtown core, but they just happen to have a ton of parking right there.
Yeah, they have a huge space.
Yeah, a lot of their parking is required for their number of employees, not necessarily their retail space. They have a very small retail space.
They do.
They have a lot of employees.
Right.
And they're outside. Currently, the C1 zone ends at 11th Street. No, it ends at 13th, 12th, ends at 12th Street. So it's only from 12th to 14th.
Okay.
So do we feel like discussion about parking needs to be in the comprehensive plan regarding economic development?
Yes. Or is there another place it should be?
I don't know.
Well, we have other chapters that talk about like what we would like the city to look like. Like we can still tinker with the previous chapter. I kind of do feel like the things that are in here should be specific to economic. Like if we feel like parking is a major economic driver in Philomath, absolutely should be in here. If it's not going to be a major economic driver in the next 20 years, maybe to that extent we leave it out.
Yeah, but parking goes with commerce, like if
It
people
does.
are driving to businesses, if having parking affects the success or failure of businesses, then I feel like it is relevant. But
Yeah, I
We
mean,
did-
if you're going to try and attract people to come here, they have to have a place to park. Which
Right.
generally I think they do today, but
They do. And as you transition from a spread out small town to a more densely developed small town, people's expectations of parking need to change, because you can't just have business with a parking lot in front, business with a parking lot in front, business with a parking lot, and be what you want to be. So
I mean, I guess that's the thing, because I agree with both of you guys. Parking, of course, is important, and if you can't park, you can't really come. But we can't specify everything in this document. And so I guess, like, if we imagine, around the cost, this one has like 25. So if we imagine that our rewrite of this has 25, or maybe we simplify it and has 20, does one of those 20 most important things for the economic future of Philomath need to be parking? If we feel like it is, if it's 1/20th of the problem, absolutely there should be a clause in here. But if we think that the changes that we've made recently to our code adequately address it, maybe it doesn't go into this rewrite.
The Main Street plan, which was completed at the same time as the economic opportunities analysis was done, has a whole section related to parking and downtown, specific to downtown parking, and pros and cons and recommended code lane, actually very specific recommendations for code lane changes in order to encourage development of the downtown area. So maybe at this level, it could be a more general statement. I definitely think parking is vital to the downtown area, whether you limit it or you expand it. We need to mention it, but it could be maybe a little more general, knowing that we've got a separate planning document that addresses it more specifically. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what code language we implement for the C1 zone, the C2 zone, and then any other commercial zone that we have. We'll have very specific language in the code about what's required for parking. And so we can have a lot of debate and discussion about pros and cons at that level. I think we definitely want to address it, whether we're going to provide adequate parking for each commercial zone and each industrial use, or it could just be kind of a more general statement that we recognize parking is important and we're going to require the appropriate amount of parking.
yeah,
without saying what that is. Yeah.
I'd like to quickly jump in that the updated meeting memorandum that Pat that is laid out on the table, he specified a few things in the current code that would be good for the commission to take a look at. And Darlene, I emailed this to you earlier today. And parking codes was one of those items. So you're hitting right on exactly what Chris just said.
well, for tonight, I think we can say we have to say something about parking in this chapter. Is that enough for tonight? All right. I'll keep pushing the cart. That was 15.
No, that was
It was 17.
That was my
I'm sorry, 17. Yep. 18, I think we can strike because that was regarding very specifically timing of the couplet.
But we do want to have some discussion about College Street post-couplet. And there's some, again, we don't need to do it tonight, but there's some pretty good recommendations about College Street and mixed use zoning and the current zoning, the disadvantages of the current zoning. And that's a whole discussion that we can kind of talk through. But again, if we don't want to take the time tonight, then maybe what would be best there is to look back to the Eco Northwest recommendations.
There was a lot there.
And maybe pull that in, and we can talk about that when we're all looking at the same thing. That'd be easier.
Okay. So 19 is a concept that kind of restricts the commercial zoning designation to areas that have a market analysis need.
Well, that makes sense to me, 19 does. because at least how I read it, how I understand it, which could be wrong, is that somebody has shown that this is where they need to be. This is where their commercial business needs to be. So we work with them. I mean, that's now whether or not it needs to be in, it's pretty specific though. Commercial zoning designation
Yeah,
in areas not designated commercial.
yeah, because if you look ahead to 2020 does a good job of kind of specifying out what I think all of us want, a contiguous commercial area. And then 19 seems to kind of make that a little bit crazier for reasons that are not apparent.
Has 19 been an issue? Do people want to rezone
their house to a business.
Because it can't go anywhere else.
I mean, you could, I guess the recent examples would be like the Dollar General, which I mentioned earlier. That was a split zone that was partially commercial, partial industrial. And so they actually came to the Planning Commission for a zone change to convert that to all commercial so that they could locate there. It's not in the downtown core. It's, so, you know, on the outskirts of town, you would say on the far west end of town. So, you know, for them to, 19 would have required that they provide a market analysis demonstrating that there was a need for shopping on the far west end of town.
Yeah, that seems like
pretty heavy-handed.
Yeah,
It seems like their market analysis was probably all of Philomath, not specific to the west end of town,
Right.
because we're literally less than 2 miles long. So I think 19 is probably less.
But if somebody was concerned about that issue, I would propose, you know, maybe changing 20 a little bit to strengthen it rather than having
Folded in.
2 separate bullet items. But
Sounds fair.
um, 21
Yes.
again is a discussion of specific things that I think is worthwhile having in here. Maybe not these specific statements, but
How much of this do we have currently
That's what I wrote. What happened?
in the code?
We've got pretty good language in the downtown area about the 0 setback lines. I think there's a maximum setback of 10 feet or 15 feet, I think, but there's an encouragement to be a zero setback in Main Street. On Main Street between 14th and 19th.
Liquor store comes to mind.
Yeah,
The what?
Liquor store.
yeah.
So is that, when you say a front yard, I'm a little, and landscaped front yard, who,
You're thinking of a residence.
well, what I read this to say is 12th to 14th, you know, right in the
Sure.
downtown, the buildings are up against the
Right.
sidewalk.
Yeah.
And then once you get east of 14th, it steps back and there's a little more space between the road and the buildings.
right, but it says
That's all
that
it's really saying. Right?
required landscaping. I guess that's the part I'm sticking on. I'm like, I'm not seeing a lot of landscaping.
No.
in front
Well,
of
there's
those
some bushes
businesses
in
between
front of the
14th
liquor
and
store
19th.
that make it really hard to see when you're on
There's some
18th Street trying to turn on the highway.
That is
So-
sad landscaping, but yeah.
Yeah,
The liquor store is, I think, an exact example of what they were trying to avoid by having this clause in here, but it didn't really make it into the code.
Right.
And so it didn't really do anything, good or bad. Like, I'm not judging the original clause, but I think they wanted that more like the convenience store where there's like parking lot in front, there's some space, or the gas stations are kind of more open or whatever. They're not beautiful, but it's a different style of downtown than
there's some
downtown
street
downtown.
trees there. And
Yeah,
Where?
I honestly,
in front of La Roquina.
yeah,
There are trees?
Mhm.
All right.
I'm not sure what it gets
Okay.
us. I mean, I kind of can understand someone saying, well, we don't want the whole area to look like the downtown core, but honestly, downtown core is kind of one of the prettier parts of it. So
It is.
I'm not really sure what they're trying to accomplish here. I mean, I can see the motivation. I just don't see the practical reality of what this does for us. And I do like what Depa said, like, the code that we have now, or the one that he's working on, I forget where we're at in that process, would have made the liquor store change some architectural components and make it a lot more attractive. So, as long as that sort of thing continues.
And again, I think a lot of this can be captured in the different code requirements for each of the different zones, right? So if you're zone C1, you've got different setback requirements, different landscape requirements. I agree, don't require a new development on Main Street and on 12th or 13th to put in street trees, right? Because they're already there and they have a zero lot line, they're not putting any street trees in on their property, right? And so, just an example, we do these site plan reviews of a new business coming in on Main Street in the downtown area, and the landscaping just goes out the window. They have no landscaping, right? They have zero lot line frontage, and they have neighbors on either side of them.
Mm-hmm.
So there are no landscape requirements there. But you go outside of that, you go to like the True Value or the restaurants and stuff, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, now you've got some land in front of you, so now we want some landscaping out there. So, but again, that's a different zone. That's a C2 zone as opposed to C1. So I think this language can get incorporated into the code. It's already in the code. And again, I think they're talking conceptually here. That you drive through Main Street. I think the example is given like Lincoln City. You don't want to drive all the way through town and it just all looks the same. We want to distinguish the downtown area, which is the zero lot line or the zero setbacks, from our other commercial districts where you've got like shopping centers that you pull into and park, and then you have a shopping center.
I think we could have, like I was discussing before, this general section up front would say that we would have our zoning developed such that there is a differentiation between different types of zones, a downtown core, and then adjacent commercial district with more landscaping. And then if we wanted to get specific and talk about 12th and 14th and 19th streets, do that kind of in that separate piece that I was talking about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I'm trying to think of a good example of a business that has landscaping at the front. And it's not a perfect example, but the Dutch Brothers in Corvallis downtown near the fire station? And they have this huge flower garden in front of
that's really pretty.
Right? And it's really, really pretty. And it's still the little tiny, I want to say it's Dutch Brothers, little tiny
I
business.
can't think of where you're talking about.
Fifth Street,
Oh.
Corvallis.
Yeah.
And as you're coming in from past the water treatment plant and
Oh,
stuff,
right.
you come into
Oh.
town on the right-hand
Yeah.
side, there's this little Dutch Brothers, and they always have like tulips and stuff in the front. And it's really kind of pretty. It's not a perfect example, but it is an example of something different than the brick facade right on the sidewalk kind of thing. But I think I hear what you're saying, that if we said something like the C2 zone is going to continue focusing on green spaces in front of businesses, we could later on decide what C2 and C1 is, or if we want to change it. Right. If we just say C2 means stuff in front of it.
Right.
Well, I think the better example for us specifically is the Eats and Treats. The old.
Yeah, that's fair.
They've just got a few. It's the road, the sidewalk, a few bushes.
Right, Eats and Treats is very much in the character of Philomath, because there's some spot for planting things. It's kind of a wooden structure. It's not terribly tall.
Right.
Yeah. But like the new coffee, Timbertown, for example.
Oh yeah.
Big lot. Nothing. Like, why is there absolutely no
We have a couple
landscaping?
whiskey barrels, plants, and I'm sorry, Jana, what did you say? Why not what?
I was wondering if, like, to me, that's what I thought of when I read this. I was like, oh,
I think it's because
is there supposed to be landscaping there?
Like maybe the margins on coffee aren't that great and they can't afford it, or I don't know what their specific situation is. But the point is, if a business moved in there, they could have it. They do have the space.
But when they redeveloped, they probably weren't required to.
Right.
They were, but the trade-off is parking, right? And there was a greater requirement for parking than there was for landscaping, because they were already very tight on the parking requirement. They were using adjacent street parking to allow them to qualify them to even go in there.
And isn't a lot of that on the corner not part of that same lot?
Yeah, they don't own that lot.
There's actually what you think of as
used to be.
part of their parking lot is
They
not
don't
their
own it.
property.
Yeah.
Right.
So they just have
It was the original La Roca, I think it was.
La
Right.
Roca.
So one of the things that Pat's working on in the downtown design standards that that's been put on the shelf for a little bit is some alternatives to like green landscaping, to put like some stem walls and other things where you can still have that separation, where you can't do it horizontally, you can do it vertically and create some separation that way. They actually just recently put a fence up that Pat's been on them about doing. So they actually have put a fence up there now to give a little bit more distinction between the parking lot and the sidewalk there in front of Timbertown. So it's a black 3.5 foot fence, and
What's a stem wall?
stem wall would be like a half wall made of block or concrete or brick of some sort, usually. That is going to separate your parking lot from the back of the sidewalk. Gives pedestrians more sense of safety because they're not walking right in front of cars that are pulling up and parking in those spots.
Keeps
And-
cars from driving over the curb.
And as you're driving down the road, it kind of separates that parking lot from the street, from the streetscape area, and then you've got the parking lots on the other side of this half wall. So visually, it separates it. Again, where you can't do it with a 5 foot green buffer area, and you try to create some height and create some separation that way. It's an alternative when you don't have space for landscaping, then the stem wall would be required in lieu of that. I think I get this on 21, so that gives you enough to work on.
Okay. 22, yeah, the city should encourage businesses for tourists traveling through.
No problem with that.
23, encourage design of new buildings to be compatible. And we've done
We're
some
doing
work
that.
on that. Yeah. Support community events, festivals, and activities at the county museum, which attracts visitors to Philomath. So again, we're getting real specific there.
If we remove the last half of that,
Yeah, I agree. Then it becomes our generic, and then
the
if we want
generic thing, yeah.
to have something very pointed about
Right.
any particular location, then we kind of set that aside.
Right.
And then the city will amend the comprehensive plan.
What's the?
What is a North Philomath plan?
Yeah.
It's probably in my file cabinet somewhere.
Was that part of Philomath
Commercial nodes
2000?
outside the highway corridor in downtown.
Remember Philomath 2000? That's in North Philomath.
No, it wasn't Philomath 2000. The North Philomath plan had more to do with creating connectivity up to West Hills Road.
Well, was that, because
Oh.
that whole 19th Street project, that was around that same time frame, wasn't it?
No, it's before then. So connectivity between 9th and 19th somewhere, or,
A long time since I saw it.
all right. Well, let's strike.
Oh, it is? Do we
It's
need it?
ancient history. It's ancient history.
I think this would be a more general statement about updating the comprehensive plan on a regular basis of some sort. And again, I can look at the language we used for the housing that we liked on how often and what that was. I don't remember exactly what we settled on, but
We could just keep the first sentence and lose the rest.
Yeah.
Diminish the reliance on automobiles? I mean, how's that gonna fit in with really anything? I mean, unless we have our own little trolley car going around the city, I mean.
Well, we talked about a lot of those principles in the housing chapter of just connectivity and walkability and all that.
Talk about
Promoting.
bicycle connectivity.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Gary?
Well, we did pretty good. We were only off. We did 65 minutes, off by a factor of 3.
Mhm.
I
Yes.
have a question. Can we put in something specific about the safety of 9th Street and West Hills, which
Hmm.
is like a death trap? Even though I know it's county, but it's,
is it related to commercial and industrial economic?
Probably not in the economic development chapter.
Huh.
I know that's a soft spot for you.
That's a good point, though. I mean, that with the increase in,
I mean, if
In
there were.
houses on
if there
19th,
were
there's a lot more
bike
traffic.
lanes on West Hills, it
Hmm.
would get used.
Well, I think there's a big discussion we could have about our relationship with the county and their development of 13th and 9th and 19th and
Mhm.
Or lack thereof.
or lack thereof, yes.
Yeah.
So can we take a 5-minute recess?
Yes.
Boom.
Cookies.
Thank you.
Joe's going dinner, you
Yeah,
know.
did have a little bit of soup. My wife just put it in. The 6 o'clock thing is a little tough sometimes. I just got home. The boys dropped him off. Luckily, I had texted ahead to get these things made. So I have some, this is just
Anyway, but on the slight chance we're not, I may have to.
Okay.
fair enough. Do you mind if we talk about this briefly?
I was hoping we would, but
Okay.
I was saving that till last.
Great.
Which?
And
The calendar.
you meant the
Schedule?
the schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lost order.
I'm snuffing everybody up too, sure here. certainly what I do.
Thank you, Doctor.
Is the recording starting?
That's really okay.
That's excellent.
Okay, reconvening City of Philomath Planning Commission meeting to discuss the economic development chapter of the comprehensive plan. And we've gone through the current version of the comprehensive plan. And what I had proposed is a quick look at attachment A, the economic policies from Eco Northwest. And I like when a chapter is organized, kind of, the current chapter is not organized, it's just shotgun, a whole bunch of unrelated ideas. The way the Eco Northwest document that we have here as attachment A is laid out is there's policy 1, land supply, policy 2, infrastructure planning, 3, development, infill, and redevelopment. And then 4 is existing business retention, new business development, attraction of new business. And 5 is workforce development. Now, I'm not exactly tied to those sections myself, but I'd love it if we have sections that kind of collate things. It makes it easier to digest and I think easier to discuss as well. Because we end up with a more cohesive document that actually provides somebody direction better. So are there any thoughts about that concept? And then like I said, I really support the idea of having the last one being some specific actionable principles about different locations, whether it be the downtown core or the highway corridor or the northwest corner where we've got large development or whatever. So yes.
So as it relates to, again, the housing chapter, we want some uniformity throughout the comprehensive plan, right?
Mhm.
So for uniformity's sake, rather than policy 1, that would be goal 1.
Yep. Mhm.
And then where it's objectives, we're actually calling those policies.
Mhm.
And so objective 1.1
Right.
would just be labeled policy 1.1.
Right.
And then in the housing one, at least, we didn't insert information at the action item level. That was left out of the policy document and understood that that would be carried forward into either a strategic planning document
Right.
for the city council to take on or some other specific task, but it was more task oriented, so therefore it wouldn't be in the comprehensive plan. So that's kind of how it read through. More generally, I think, again, to combine, I think land supply could include a policy about infrastructure. That could just be a policy within land supply and land availability. So when we're talking about the previous or the current section about an appropriate level of land and different sizes and different tracts and both industrial and commercial, then part of that could also be, providing the necessary planning for the appropriate level of infrastructure to support commercial and industrial development, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know that it would be a whole separate policy on itself. I think it could be combined.
I think that's a good idea.
And if I understand you right, Gary, what you're proposing isn't so much, dragging and dropping chunks of this into our new chapter. It's really just using their really clear organizational structure and kind of headings to give us some bones to put our information on there.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, I like Chris's first suggestion is that we have our goal number 1 be our land supply, but the part of that land supply goal is what they have as policy 2, infrastructure planning, rather than making it a separate goal. Just put that infrastructure into part of the land supply, because it really is, that's what it's about. It's about land supply.
Super.
Your previous description of specifics being separate from general, would you view the actions as specifics to be in a separate section?
Yes, or not even in the comprehensive plan, because I think some of these actions I would not put in the comprehensive plan, but would consider them in the next phase, right?
Sorry, what did you say? You would consider them what? Where?
Some of the action items in the Eco Northwest report here are highly specific recommendations regarding rezoning. And I think it's better to leave the comprehensive plan as overarching guiding principles. And I mean, if you look at action 3B on page, I guess on the third page of the document, but they number them 0, 1, 2, which is a little disconcerting. But anyway, consider rezone OR downtown, mixed use and C1 residential, and do this and that, and apply this to the main street. That at that level of discussion, we could have a 40-page document on the zoning in the city of Philomath. And I don't think any of us really want to engage that deeply in the next 2 months.
Yeah, but doesn't removing it kind of dilute?
No, because this entire document is still an appendix to our comprehensive
Right, so
plan.
we're still keeping it anyway.
We've got it, and it's a very specific action. So we ought to have an objective, or got goals and policies. Goals and policies. So we could have a policy that we rezone the downtown to meet some thing that we want to accomplish. But as far as whether we call it OR or mixed use or the nitty gritty of how we're going to do it, that really comes up when we're rewriting the zoning. And we ought to be referring to this document when we're doing that. But if we put that much detail here, we're going to have a full page discussion on every 3-block section of the entire city. And I think that's too much in a comprehensive plan.
It's a 20-year plan. It's going to take
Right.
20 years to do it.
Right. And we'll update every 20 years the week after we finish it. Right.
Ideally, you're going to update it every 5 to 10 years.
Well,
Yeah.
but if it takes 20 years to write it,
Right.
we'll start rewriting it the day after we finish. So,
Makes sense.
I mean, we could be lazy and just adopt this as our comprehensive plan chapter of the economic development, but I think that's counterproductive, and that's kind of the decision we made for the zoning chapter too.
But there was a lot of, by the housing chapter,
I'm sorry, that's what I meant to say.
which is true, but a lot of the language in the housing chapter did come from this document, but we added into that existing policies that we thought were still relevant. We just put them in under the right heading where it fit. And then we added in specific language from other cities' policies that we really, really liked that we also felt were relevant. And then they got put into the right policy. So, but we really did use the language Eco Northwest put in there. That was really the base that we started with for our chapter. It's very similar to what Eco Northwest put in there. It just has a lot more added to it.
And so it's not really lazy by using it. Because
Well,
we still make it our
No,
own.
I'm saying we could just say, okay, we're done. Put comprehensive plan on the top of this piece of paper and we're done. But we want to work it. We want to make it ours rather than just adopt every word that they wrote.
I agree.
So your plan is to kind of pull that together in this sort of format, some of the things we've already discussed from the existing chapter with some of these items for a draft for us to discuss in 2 weeks.
Right. So it would be very helpful, again, is if there's specific objectives here that you're opposed to, that'd be good for me to know so I can remove those.
This one on the Echo
On the,
Northwest.
yep, on attachment A. That if there's specific objectives in here that we don't like, then let's talk about those. And then for 20 minutes. And then after that 20 minutes, then let's have a discussion. Is it what's missing, right? Are there overall policies like we found in the housing? There were just things like we talked about sustainability. Wasn't it really even touched on in Eco Northwest document? As definitely not on the policy level or what was recommended. And so that was a whole section that we brought in from other jurisdictions that we brought in that Eco Northwest haven't covered and that wasn't covered in our current housing policies, right? So similarly, and again, this is just a plan and the plan can be changed, but similarly, I think that a lot of this language is probably pretty good language and is supported by the economic opportunities analysis. Some of it may seem right or may be logical, but maybe we just don't agree with it because we don't want that in our downtown area. We don't want it in our commercial areas, right?
And
So-
some of it's almost exactly what was in our previous plan, a few of them.
So Gary, so what you're proposing is that we discuss the goal, like land supply,
Mhm.
and then the new policy, like policy 1.1, but leave action items to another document.
Yeah, but there might be some of this content that's written in the action items that we want to pull in.
Corporate.
But I would make it the exception, not the rule. I mean,
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, the entire state document that rules what we do is like one page, right? And,
Right.
And then this is, 3 pages, let's say. We're
Mhm.
going to subtract some and add some to it.
Yeah.
So it probably doesn't make sense to take a bunch of things that are already in the appendix of our document and just
So-
pull them out and stick on there, unless there's a specific thing that we feel.
yeah. I mean, for example, 3.4E, the first bullet says establish window coverage requirements for the C1 zone, and then parentheses, and potentially more flexible requirements for the C2 and or OR new
Yeah.
or new mixed use zones. That doesn't belong in the comprehensive plan.
So I do have one thing that I wanted to suggest. Literally, what we've talked about so far, with the addition of one thing, I would be done. I would be happy. Is this an okay time to mention that? Or do you want me to hold on?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is coming from our experiences with the property that we're building on 19th Street. I wasn't heavily involved in it, and I don't think anything that comes out of this discussion is going to influence me or affect any of us, me in any way, because that's water under the bridge. I'm just using my experiences there to kind of inspire this discussion here. I have no interest in the matter financially. I just want to make that clear. So when we dealt with the city, Chris and everyone at the city was extremely helpful. We found the process to be as painless as the city could make it. Now, there's a bunch of organizations we had to appease, and that part was a little hairy. The only thing from an economic standpoint that would have made it easier for a business like ours to say, hey, we want to bring 100 jobs to Philomath, would be if there were some processes or something that would give the city more comfort in giving specificity to certain questions at the outset. And that sounds really vague. So what I mean by that is if you go to the city and you say, hey, I want to build X, what's it going to cost me in fees? The city can give you an estimate, but it's only an estimate, and banks don't take estimates. And the same is true with certain other questions you ask. And it's not because the city is trying to hide that information. It's all spelled out in code. But there are certain concerns that we could probably talk about that make it difficult to get that information. And the only way to actually get it is to commit to it. Say, okay, we're going to do this. We're just going to full send this. We're going to make a guess as to what the fees are going to be. We're going to hope for the best from like the planning commission when we go talk to them. And it's a big gamble on the part of someone who wants to come in. And so it'd be nice if there was some way, whatever those problems are that are making it difficult for the city to specify in writing, like here's the dollar amount we'll charge you. The answer to this question is yes, the answer to that question is no, and we guarantee this for 12 months. You can't get that right now. We can't supply that as a city, and that would be extremely valuable to someone coming in as a business just to be able to have yes and no kind of answers. And again, I don't want to get mired down in like why that is the way it is, because I'm sure that's a detailed discussion. If there was any way we could approach that, I feel like it would be very helpful in economic incentives or in economic whatever.
Well, I'm positive we could put some really squishy, non-specific language in here that said the city's going to do everything they can to give developers and business interests the information they need to move forward.
Yeah, because
I
the
think we
details
can
are
all support
honestly
that.
another discussion. But if we're just saying
The
hey, we want to
details is
support
where it's
that
hard.
mindset, yeah.
I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, what I hear from the community about economic development and jobs and new businesses is significantly different than the mixed amount of things I hear about housing development and new housing, right? With housing, it's, I would say, split, or the most it's mixed, very mixed, right? Some people see the need for the new housing, they support the new housing. Others are like, absolutely no new housing, make it difficult, and then there's this whole mix in between, right? I don't hear a lot of people saying we don't want new businesses in town. Like we don't want new jobs. We don't want more. So to me, it seems like we have to maybe tread a little bit less carefully about how supportive the city is on new businesses coming to town. That seems to be pretty openly, generally expected and or anticipated, or we want more of that, right? So like your experience, I don't hear people contradicting you say, no, I think the city should make it more difficult for new business to come to town because we just want to support existing businesses. We don't want any new businesses. We just want to support existing businesses in town, right? Because any new business comes to town, it's competition. We don't want competition. We like what we're at. We don't want, I don't hear that sentiment like I do with like housing, right? We have enough housing, we don't need more. So to that point, I think anything that we can do to more generally say we want to remove obstacles, we want to make it more streamlined, we want to ease the process. And, you know, Commissioner Yoder, I think, specifically brought up concerns about that in the housing policy where there were those types of comments. I think, oh, do we want to ease obstacles for all types of housing? Because that's what we're saying, right? And the comment back always was, well, if we're going to do it for low income housing, then you kind of just have to say we're going to try to remove obstacles to housing. So those types of statements may be more appropriate for the economic chapter, I guess is what I'm getting after. But if that's wrong, that'd be good for me to hear. Because otherwise, a lot of that kind of language is in here as well, like removing obstacles, streamlining the process, making it simpler for developers and business owners to come to Philomath. That's what I hear on my day to day. So I just want to make sure that's going to be reflected in the document. Everybody's comfortable with that.
Definitely.
Generally speaking.
Definitely.
You know, but it's still, you know, there's been development that we're not real comfortable with because, like the Letman, because for one thing, it's not bringing in a whole lot of jobs. You know, I mean, that was part of the issue when it came to the planning department, is it really didn't give a lot of jobs.
Yeah, I guess I would argue that if, like, take Letman for an example, if we didn't want, if rewinding a couple years, if we didn't want Letman in, there are probably ways of accomplishing that goal that are better than making it difficult for them to see how much it's going to cost them to come here. Like if they say, hey, how much are we going to pay in SDC fees? And we say probably somewhere less than $1 million, that's very vague and unhelpful. And that might be a disincentive for them to come to town. But if that's really our goal, there are probably smarter ways for us to accomplish that. And we should be able to say $649,000
$1 billion
and 50 cents. You know, whatever the number is, it feels like muddying communication is probably not the most helpful way to accomplish that.
The zoning where your business is appropriate is over in these areas or over these areas.
Yeah, exactly.
Not this area. This area is zoned for X, right? So
you
can do it through zoning and through code.
Yeah, exactly. Do it through zoning. And I know there are reasons why it's difficult presently for the city to do that. There's probably something having to do with, I don't know, like liability or our process or risk or something like that. And we can deal with those specifics later. I'm merely suggesting that at least for desirable businesses, we try and make it easy for the city to be able to say, here's a dollar amount.
I think we can make it easier for the city for all businesses and then
do
other things, just like you said.
Yes.
Right.
That's the only thing that I was going to suggest. Other than that,
Commissioner Bernardini.
I have a definition question. On objective 3.3, it talks about the restriction of certain uses that are highly auto-oriented. I don't know what that means, auto-oriented.
Gas stations, that kind of stuff.
Gas stations, drive-through banks, drive-through restaurants.
Okay, so not like car part selling
Not
thing.
necessarily.
It's things that involve driving to.
And staying in your car.
Right.
okay.
Okay, I didn't know if that was
You reminded me of something interesting.
uh-huh.
I'm just going to throw this out there. I heard through the grapevine that well, I think we all know that all the gas stations in Philomath are owned by the same individual.
Oh, wow.
And I heard through the grapevine that somebody I know had a discussion with this person, who I don't know, by the way. I've never met them and I don't know their name. And that person said that his business model was to go into little towns, buy all the gas stations, and then raise all the prices. And then he's done it in little towns throughout Oregon. I haven't verified it. I haven't researched it. It could be untrue. But it is an economic disincentive for Philomath to have high gas prices arbitrarily. Would it be within our scope to say something like, we're not going to allow monopolies of gas stations in Philomath?
think that's out of our league.
Maybe that's a question that we hit our attorneys with and come back in a couple weeks when we have an answer. Because
That
honestly, I
seems
think
like
that's
economic
I think that's-
development. I mean, a monopoly might be a strong word, but I mean, that certainly deals with the subject.
I'm just
That's
thinking like a lot of people are driving through Philomath. If we want those people to stop for gas, and I'm not saying we do. I mean, I think we're all hoping for like an electric future anyway, but like the reality is that people stop for gas. And if we want that to happen, if our gas happens to cost 20 cents a gallon more than anywhere else, they're going to just keep on driving and try and make it to Newport.
Toledo.
Yeah, Toledo or something like that. It's just an interesting
Toledo.
thing. I don't care a whole lot one way or the other. My car's electric, but I thought I'd throw it out there and just for what it was worth.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Mhm.
Anyway, just something to mull over. I'll shut my mouth. I wonder.
Someone else suggested imposing a city gas tax.
Well, you know what? We could do both. That's the beauty of it. At least if that 20 cents a gallon surcharge was going into the city's pockets instead of Mr. Monopoly gas pockets.
Monopoly gas markets.
I mean, I don't know. That doesn't seem like a terribly great business model. Jack up the prices of gas in small towns in Oregon. Maybe it helps people drive less. It helps.
Well, I think we're a little off script at this point.
All right.
Point of order.
So, okay, I have a question. On page 0,
Mhm.
Yeah.
are we going to discuss right now the actions or not?
I would propose that we not discuss the actions.
Okay. And when will we be doing that?
Well, I think what we do is we discuss maybe the higher level, whether that's all the objectives or maybe just a few, and give Chris enough information to go away, make a draft,
Okay,
and then we can throw things back in.
Okay,
I think
thank you.
if we discuss each action, we'll be here for 3 more hours.
we will be.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
But in the meantime, there are objectives, and
1.1 is pretty vanilla. It's kind of like the number 1 and 2 on our current we were talking about. So again,
Yep.
I think that language is pretty good, and I can look at that and massage a little bit and bring that back. Again, looking at number 1 and number 2 of our existing and this, and kind of pull those all together. Objective 1.2, provide adequate short-term supply of suitable commercial and industrial land to respond to economic development opportunities as they arise. You know, there's a specific definition there for short-term supply as opposed to just kind of general adequate supply, which I don't know is overly helpful, but that's just my opinion.
And I'm perfectly fine with you coming out with a draft that kind of cuts redundant things that you feel are redundant. And if we feel like you've cut something, then we'll have our chance to talk about it in the next meeting, and then 2 meetings again after that.
I would like to have us see how the rest of you guys felt about like objective 2.1. And, you know, on policy 3, where the city will, objective 2.1, the city will. Policy 3 on page 2, the city will. If those words can be changed to evaluate, like objective 2.1, evaluate capital improvement planning to ensure infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. Instead of the city will coordinate capital improvement planning. So we're looking at it. We're not, it's, I guess the will just sounds just too harsh, you know, that we could come back later and say, well, it says right here, we will do this. Like policy 3, development, infill development, and redevelopment on page 2. The city will support and encourage development. Instead of evaluate, the city will evaluate the support and encourage development.
Well, I don't think it's too strong to say support and encourage. I mean, that's a pretty low bar. I mean, how strong?
So Peggy, do you like for 2.1, just the city coordinates capital improvement planning to ensure, just take will out and make it
Yeah.
coordinates?
Right, yeah.
I don't know. Personally, I find it comforting to read something that says the city's going to do something. I don't know. I like the strong language. I like it for documents like this, especially if we're dealing with all this high level stuff. I like seeing an action verb like don't worry, people, the city is gonna do this.
I kind of agree with you.
I
Otherwise,
just,
otherwise, why is it in there?
I don't know that it's really different either way. I mean, from a legal perspective, if it says anything about the city coordinating
true, it's a stylistic
planning, I
thing.
mean, it's a style
Yes,
more
well,
than.
that's interesting because I see such a difference between the city will and the city will evaluate, or evaluate and
Mhm.
do. They're two different things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, you can make an
I
argument.
guess evaluate is just too squishy.
Well, I think there's a lot of squishy words there. Coordinate is a very squishy word.
I guess when you're making a land use decision or writing code, what kind of language do you want to be looking at for guidance?
Uh-huh.
Do you want the stronger language or do you want the gentler language?
Right.
Depends. Depends on if I'm the developer or if I'm the. city.
Exactly.
Well, we're the city, so.
Right, so-
We're on Team City.
We're on Team City, that's right.
But we also want to encourage development of commercial and industrial lots. So that sometimes means you go a little bit softer so you have a little bit more leniency with a business that's coming in that may not be at 100% where the code says they have to be, right?
Hmm.
Then it's the city may, or the city shall encourage or promote, right? So sometimes those squishy words help a business application meet muster where otherwise it may not if it's absolute black and white. But that's different language than what we're talking about here. So
Can I ask a question about 2.3? It talks about coordinating development proposals and need for private infrastructure, electrical, natural gas, telecom. Is that appropriate for a comprehensive plan? I mean, that seems like that's something that just happens. Does the city ever engage with those private providers to say, hey, we're doing this, will you do that, or you need to do this?
every project, I mean, any private projects coming in and then any city project we're doing, we coordinate with them. And it just makes sense. If we're putting a road in, that's the first call we make is to the other utilities, say, hey, we're updating this road. You've got utilities there, you want to coordinate. If it's a new development's coming in and they're gonna need all those utilities, they're at the meeting, pre-engineering,
Yeah,
engineering, pre-construction, they're at the table giving their input.
I guess my question is, what's the point of having this statement in here?
I think it just falls under infrastructure planning and they needed some additional objectives other than just the one to fit that. But again, that'd be an easy one to cut if we're gonna
Right.
combine it.
All right.
I have a question then about objective 2.2. The city will identify opportunities to reduce infrastructure costs without negative impacts on the health, safety, service obligations, or added financial obligations. Would that fit with that, to the city, to the taxpayers? To added financial obligations? Because there are some things that do add to the financial obligations, correct? For the taxpayers, like renewal districts.
Well,
or
certainly,
something.
Well, but
Certainly reduced SDCs would, because then you gotta make that up in utility rates.
Right,
But I think this is specific to like looking for, identify opportunities to reduce infrastructure costs. Look, the action item 2.2A, I guess, is look for state funding for infrastructure, work with Business Oregon, those types of things. So maybe that's one where the action item can be combined up into the objective to make the objective a little bit more clear that we're not talking about
yeah,
discounts that would impact health or safety or you know, the financially current residents or businesses, but that we're talking about outside funding sources to help reduce the upfront infrastructure costs.
okay.
That's something, you know, literally we've been a little more proactive on. You know, we do pre-construction meetings and that's a good opportunity for us, for the city to be a little more proactive in talking about the different grant opportunities that the state offers through Business Oregon or otherwise. That's not something that we were very familiar with or did a lot of traditionally, but it's something that we're definitely doing a little bit more proactively now so that at the beginning of the project, the applicant knows that there's these resources that are available if they're doing job creation, if they've got specific infrastructure projects, those types of things. We can get low interest loans and even some grants sometimes through Business Oregon to help those businesses out.
thank you, Jim.
Did
Don't
somebody,
forget your jacket.
Your jacket.
John,
did,
good eye.
I don't think anybody, none of us propose putting these things, just copy pasting them into our new document, right? We're just kind of generally discussing these, but unless one of us specifically requests it, we're not putting any of these things in our economic chapter.
Well, I think I'm perfectly fine with Chris using his judgment as he's pulling the document together.
Yeah, of course.
Just because there's some things here that are rewording of things we've already discussed, and some of these things need to be pulled up into the goal to really.
Yeah, no doubt. But I guess what I mean is, if I have a problem with, like, I don't know, 4.4a or something like that, there's no point in me mentioning it because it's already part of the appendix, and unless something changes, it's not going to be part of our economic chapter.
Yeah, the action items for sure.
Yeah.
But if there's objectives, that's kind of where I start. If there's objectives, listed here as objectives that you don't like, then that'd be good to know now. And then I'll just know to not include them in the draft.
Right. All of these objectives seem very safe, like they're written by a contractor who is not going to offend anybody, and they're all kind of generically good things.
And if they're too specific, we can address it later. And if they don't include something we want included, we can add it next week.
You know, we haven't specifically talked about infill development or redevelopment, which is on policy 3.
Yes.
Which are probably worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the things we've been discussing is all about infill and redevelopment, right? Different zoning
Yes, it's true.
things. And I think that just becomes the heading that we put some of those things under, but certainly not these specific actions we haven't discussed, like urban renewal districts.
How do you feel about looking at objective 3.2? There's a couple action items there that talk specifically about expanding the C1 commercial zone. 3.2b talks about, this is the office residential zone.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about
Mixed-use.
actions. Now I'm lost.
Well, it's objective 3.2. Doesn't make sense without pulling some of that action language, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing keeping us from extending the C1 zone at some point in the future, right? Just because we don't necessarily say that we will definitely do that in our economic chapter. As long as our chapter gives us the flexibility to do it. If you're proposing, for example, that we should right now decide that we're going to extend the C1 zone, and we believe it so strongly we're going to put some language to that effect in our economic chapter, then we should probably discuss that. But if you don't feel that strongly about it, and none of us do, I feel like we should just by default leave it out.
Well, I think we've all agreed that discussing the commercial zoning in the downtown core is something we're absolutely going to do. So I think we could just convert 3.2 from all this specificity to say that we will evaluate the current C1, C2, and office residential zoning in the core.
Because we want to have that discussion, just not necessarily now.
Right. Yeah. And then we can even throw in some of the specific language that's been coming at us over and over again about expanding the business opportunities and mixed use and density and infill, and we throw a few of those words in there, and then we'll have a big conversation once the comp plan is done.
Yeah, thank you. That was the answer to my question.
Okay.
Isn't objective 3.3 seems too specific, maybe?
I would agree. But if somebody cares a lot about it, I wouldn't object to it being in there.
I didn't catch what you said, Ruth.
Objective 3.3 in the same way as 3.2 seems too specific to be in there.
I think it's because it's, if you look at the actions, it's really specifying the Philomath Main Street plan, which Eco Northwest also did for us. So but it does it without mentioning the Main Street plan. So I think if 3.3 specifically called out, look at the best practices recommended in the Philomath Main Street plan and implement, accordingly or whatever. So I think if we reference Main Street plan in here and simplify the other language, we can
I like that idea.
Generalize a little bit more.
Yeah, the close-knit building fabric doesn't seem to fit in there very well.
So then in 20 years, somebody can say, what is the Philomath Main Street plan? Has anyone seen that?
And they'll say, it's on my shelf. Now, hopefully they'll say, yeah, we pull it out and look at it every day.
Remember all that good work we did? That was implementing the Main Street plan.
Joseph's done. I can tell.
How can you tell,
I
Peggy?
think it was done half an hour.
You're just as gone and out of here as Johnny is.
I really liked the way Chris put together the last document, and I like everything that, Chris, that you've been saying so far tonight. And I guess mostly I'm just reflecting a pretty high degree of confidence we're gonna have a document that's, 85 to 90% good, and we're gonna have a whole nother discussion about that.
Yeah.
Remaining 5 or 10%, and then we'll have a public hearing. And
I don't see anything more in this that's worth talking about in depth tonight.
So I'll put an email out tomorrow to everybody. We'll include Van, so he's got opportunity as well. And I also see if there's specific objectives that you have that aren't in here, send those to me. If there's specific objectives in here that you've got issue with, let's write those out and say, hey, let's just, write a few words or tweak this language or something. So maybe by the end of the week, just kind of give me some feedback on these, and then I'll start pulling these together at that point based on individual feedback I get.
So you want the feedback instead of us doing it right now, going over the objectives and not the actions.
I was getting the impression we were done tonight.
I did both, actually, Peggy. On your suggestion, the two things that I had were the two things I talked about. And I put them in an email and sent them to Chris. They're waiting in your inbox.
Yeah.
But if you have other things you want to talk about, don't let my anxiety to go home change your, this is what we're here for, so.
Right. Well, there's just a few things that I would just stick with the, not go to the actions, which is where most of my questions are. One quick question on policy 4 or goal 4 is supporting business expansion and growth is an important means to expand the city's property tax. I don't know if that needs to be there. The last sentence on policy 4. Should it end the attract new businesses?
What page is that?
That was page 5 on policy 4.
The top.
The top.
First paragraph.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah, the first paragraph, second sentence. Does that need to be in there? Supporting business expansion and growth is an important means to expand the city's property tax base.
There were several of the example policies that use that. But
Yeah.
to me, it seems like it's obvious.
Yeah, plus, I guess the city's tax base is great. I don't really, to be honest, care about the city's tax base a whole lot. I care about the fact that people don't have to commute to go to jobs, and that the city's more vibrant because they have jobs in town. There's a whole list of reasons.
There might be a lot of reasons.
There might be a lot of
for-
reasons, but we
yeah,
don't have to
right,
pick out one.
but not one. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's just kind of
That's
stuck
fair.
with me. And then objective 4.2, maybe instead of coordinate economic development, continue economic development efforts. Because we're already working on
Yeah, we are.
economic development efforts. So it seems like we're just going to continue it. That would be objective 4.2. Seems like we're already doing that.
Well, there's a lot of things like that we're doing, and we just put them in the document to say we're doing them.
Nope, I'm gonna put continue to on every one of these that we're doing already, so we get credit for it.
There you go.
Sometimes we get accused of not doing enough.
And I would on objective 4.4 quickly. I would like to add the water system master plan when it says on looking for businesses it says the master plan says we limit it to dry industries. I don't even think we asked that when I can't remember if we talked about that at all when we were when your dad was
So
talking to us.
what is there some language here now that you're objecting to or proposing? I'm not sure what you're saying about the language.
Okay, 4.4 on page 6.
Mhm.
Like in the big paragraph, it does say on the way, almost to the bottom, the city should coordinate with Public Works and the city's engineer to ensure that sufficient water is available.
Yeah.
It seemed, to me, when I read it, it seems kind of weird because Public Works and the city's engineer can't provide the water. But
No, all they're doing is saying how much water is available with our current
With our
infrastructure
current-
in place.
but are,
And that's happening now, it's in our zoning and everything that when they make a proposal.
okay, so do you have an issue with adding some language that supports what our water system master plan says? And that is industries are limited to dry industries? They should be limited to dry industries,
Yeah.
You have a problem with that?
I do.
even though it's in our master plan, the water master plan? Why?
What is a dry industry?
One that doesn't require, and I don't know what the amount of water would be, but since it's probably the engineers would be best to answer that because it's in the water system master plan that the engineers put in. Now, Chris should know. It's been brought up many times about water usage over the years.
Yeah.
That's
And
an
that the
interesting, that's an interesting point. I mean, I guess I've heard for a long time that, the future's pretty uncertain when it comes to water and growth,
Sure.
but the state's expecting us to grow anyway, and
Well, the water master plan provides a plan for ensuring that we have sufficient water to meet our demands going forward. And so, there's provisions in place today on what types of businesses we'd be able to attract or be able to even service that may be different 5 or 10 years from now, maybe in a complete different ballpark. So I'm comfortable with that type of language in the master plan. I don't know that I would put it in that 20-year comprehensive plan because that may change in 5 years or 10 years. I mean, our water treatment capacity is going to double once the new treatment plant comes online. Our available water is going to change depending on how aquifer storage recovery goes. And we may be in a position where we have surplus water and we're looking for new water customers to help pay for the infrastructure we've had to put in place.
So how do we use what is stated in the master plan for the water, and it states limited to dry industries? All of the assumptions that this document made actually says in the summary that the assumptions are based on limited to dry industries. How do we support that in the comprehensive plan when that's what our document says?
Well, why would you want it limited to just water? I mean, there are a number of sample documents that encourage industries or businesses that are environmentally sustainable.
well, I think what Peggy's kind of referring to is there are a lot of people in the community that do not believe we're going to have enough water in like 10 years. And there are a lot of people in the community that maybe don't necessarily believe that, but kind of have some questions in their mind. And that's kind of the group I'm in. And so the assumption that I'm hearing from you is that maybe it's a little too easy for us to just ignore that idea and to just go ahead with development anyway. And that if we had some sort of language like that in our actual economic chapter, it would give some real upfront presence to that looming menace. Now, the caveat I have in my mind is that a water plan would be kind of by nature a technical document. And I can say from experience that it's pretty hard for the average person to fully comprehend all the nuances of things stated in a big comprehensive technical document. So I wouldn't feel if I read the water master plan, my initial interpretation might be factually wrong in many areas because I'm not really a subject matter expert. So I think you're raising a good point. I wouldn't want to just jump into putting that kind of language in here, but it does seem like it might be worthwhile asking Peggy's exact question, is our plan only to grow with dry industries? And if so, what does that mean? And give you a chance to talk to the right department and maybe come back with some details on that, and we could address that question in more
And-
detail later once we have the facts.
If it wasn't so, if it wouldn't even have come up to my mind if it wasn't in the water master plan.
Yeah, so if it's in the
But
water
it
master
is,
plan, and if
so-
it means what it says at face value, then probably it should be in here, but maybe there's some nuance and it'd just be nice to know
Well,
what that is.
in my mind, it already says that the city has to ensure that sufficient water is available to provide water services to new businesses. So the definition of ensure water is available means going to that water master plan or whatever updated version of that is, rather than locking that into a comprehensive plan.
You are 100% right, and I completely agree with you. There's a sentiment out there, I'm not saying I believe in it necessarily, but there is a sentiment out there that is afraid that we're acknowledging a dangerous reality, but then just ignoring it. And so that sentiment would want to have yet another document that kind of reinforces the fact that this is, danger Will Robinson. I think that's what's going on.
Yeah,
And
I
so
try
it
to
is.
counter that with facts rather than additional policy that tries to kind of mask that. I mean, we look at this ongoingly. There's steps that the city's taking to ensure we have adequate water. I don't know what's going to happen to the Marys River next week. I mean, it could be hit by a comet,
So
right?
then
I mean,
why
we
don't
have this
we-
uncertain future, but we have a plan for expanding the city's water use. I think generally speaking, Councilor Causey's right. We want businesses to come that are generally more conservative and do try to be sustainable and champion the environment. Like those are the businesses we want, generally speaking. I don't know why we would limit it to just water, because there's this notion out there that the city doesn't have water.
But when you have, and because to me it makes sense, I guess to me it does, I don't see the difficulty of it. If we wanted to support our master water plan, why wouldn't it be in there? And if
Well, I would say because this isn't the water plan.
of course it's not the water plan, but we're talking about what kind of businesses that we want to draw, so if something could be printed out that says, okay, the engineers that wrote this, and that said that it's all their assumptions are based on limited to dry industries, we were wrong.
So I guess example, Commissioner Yoder, if a brewery came into town and said, hey, we want to put a brewery here, are we going to say, well, you can't come to town because we've got policies in place that say you have to be a dry industry and breweries aren't a dry industry? Or would we have language that would say you need to supply the city an analysis of how much water you're going to require, and then we're going to take that number, we're going to look at how much water the city has, what our reserves are, we'll do an analysis, and we'll determine whether or not we have sufficient water for your use or not. To me, that's the more appropriate analysis to do, rather than just having a statement in a comprehensive plan that says we're only going to consider, or we're going to encourage dry businesses or industries, and we're going to discourage ones that aren't considered dry. I'd much rather do the analysis and know than just go off of something that's a little more subjective.
Yeah, I mean, clearly I know that I'm in the minority, so nothing's going to change, but it just seems like we're saying that we have this document and we're choosing to pretend that it's not there.
I think I think I understand what you're saying, and I also understand what you're saying, and I feel like we would have a more productive discussion if we had like the page you're talking about in front of us, and if we could have even like 5 minutes of time with Fear or whomever could answer the question.
I can provide the answers.
Yeah, it would just be nice to know.
Yeah,
get some nuance.
I'd be willing to see what the document says, because I'm skeptical about what it actually says.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
how I would interpret what
I
it
feel the
says.
same way, and
Because I haven't read that carefully, but I did go to the town hall thing we had a number of years ago where they brought in 8 different people on the water.
Mhm.
And a lot of people came away from that with the opinion that they had when they went in. But what I heard is 8 different people from a huge range of different fields and perspectives say, City of Philomath does not have an impending water crisis. None of them would stand behind that.
Oh yeah, and it would be great. The people that wrote this, and I can bring where it's written. It's only, if it's in the summary, it's just going to be 1 page, and to show where it states that, and then the engineers that wrote it say, well, yeah, that was before we did all this, and we did this, the city did this, and that doesn't pertain anymore.
Well, that's not that old. The water master plan, that's not that old.
Right.
I think it's 2018.
2018.
But the thing is, there will be changes in the city's water supply. So that's why I'd rather be more generic. Make sure there's no.
Changes after, put the new water treatment plant.
Yeah.
Build plants.
And I'll admit, I'm a little defensive on this just because I've had to defend the
I know
city's
you
water
are.
supply.
I know, and that's really
And it's not because an apartment complex comes in and they say we're going to use this much water, and the city says, well, we have this much water, and so we do the analysis. But it's like the engineers are talking to the engineers saying how much water we have, and then a member of the public comes up, says, well, I don't think we have any water. I was down at the Mary's River and it looked really, really low to me. I don't think we should build any new apartment complexes. Yeah. And so staff's in a position where it's like, well, I have to state the facts. As much as I enjoy swimming in the Mary's River as well, I have to go off of the numbers that I'm given. And so I get put in a position where I have to defend the city's stance that we don't have a water shortage, and that just because 10 people show up to a public hearing and say, I'm afraid that we're running out of water, doesn't mean that we're running out of water. Right. And it's something that's been stated in public hearings in contradiction to new development coming in, as I would say is a scare tactic to not have new development come in, is because we're afraid we're going to run out of water. Well, yeah, we're all afraid that we're going to run out of water, but the facts are we have water that's sufficient to meet our current needs. And if this new development, whatever it is, comes in, we need to evaluate whether we have some water sufficient to supply that new business with water. And if we do, then we can't deny a land use application for lack of water when we clearly show that we have enough water for it. And that's why I get maybe a little defensive about this notion that we just don't have water, because I think it's a repeated scare tactic that's been used by people that are opposed to new development coming in.
I don't remember it saying that.
In the summary, I can definitely get that.
What you're saying, Chris.
Well, I have it at home. I'll look it up.
The thing is, the next time that subject comes up, and we all know it's going to come up again, you'll be able to say, oh yeah.
That's right, the engineer said.
Commissioner Peggy raised that exact question. We dug into it and we satisfied all her concerns. And if you have any questions, you can talk to her about it, because she was also worrying about the same thing. And she'll be standing right behind you saying, yeah, Chris gave me all the information. We fully looked into it. You know, nothing's hidden, whatever.
Yep, I'm happy to provide it. So
totally agree.
I mean, we just did the analysis with the Letman development, right? I mean, it was a self-storage deal that didn't use hardly any water, but an RV spot that was going to use quite a bit of water. And we did the full analysis, see where we're at with water. And we still have people saying, we're just afraid we're going to run out of water if this improvement, this gets approved. And it's just like, well,
right.
I can't do anything more than provide the facts. And again,
well,
yes,
could the engineers update their summary so then we wouldn't have that issue anymore?
Well, let's bring the summary and we'll look at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I appreciate you raising the point. There was something I really liked in the Redmond sample policies where they encouraged, and it's on page 60, at the top of the page, where they encouraged businesses that would create jobs with salaries sufficient to support housing, to support homeownership, which I thought was incredible.
Which number, Ruth? I'm sorry.
It's in the Redmond plan.
On page
top of page 60.
Okay.
I guess I wonder how you do anything concrete that actually accomplishes that.
I have a suggestion for that. The two suggestions I sent to Chris, the first one had to do with potential tax incentives for businesses who are bringing in jobs. It'd be pretty easy for the city to say we're only going to count jobs that pay a livable wage, whatever that is, and then boom, now we're supporting desirable jobs or whatever our definition is. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
That sounds like a barrier where somebody's got to give a.
Where was that in the Redmond plan?
Top of page 60. 60.
Okay.
Policy 9.5, well, 9-5-2 that carries over to the top of page 60.
Okay.
I honestly believe that a business looking at locating here with the right balances would even consider giving their employees a nominal raise to meet the standard we set specifically so they can get those tax incentives. There are places where that works out.
I had something that I saw in the Sherwood plan that I thought was kind of interesting in the policy 1.1 that they want to attract, what they want to attract most are non-polluting businesses.
Yes, that's where I saw that.
And I thought that was an interesting thing to throw in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, I think the distinction between allowing businesses as opposed to this is really talking about the focus on where we want, so if we're looking to recruit, these are the efforts on recruitment, right? We're not going to try to recruit low wage jobs to come in there. We're going to try to recruit, livable wages, non-pollutants, all non-polluters, that kind of thing. So, which, you can spend a lot of time recruiting and trying to, recruit businesses. And my focus has always been on serving businesses that are here and helping them to expand and to grow their impact and their employment base and whatever. But you have to do both.
Are there any other comments or questions regarding the economic chapter before we move on to one last item? And
Also, I appreciate the feedback, so I'll give this a go. And if you want to get me individual comments back on this by the end of the week, anything that we weren't able to touch on tonight, and again, want to give Van Hunsaker an opportunity to provide comments as well. So we'll do that by the end of the week, and then I'll start pulling this together next week.
yeah.
And Haley.
And Haley and
Haley,
Gianna,
yep,
if she has
sorry.
anything else to provide.
What's the next issue?
So the next issue is the next meeting is May 3rd, where we'll go over this. And then, as has been brought up a couple of times, Pat Deppa came up with a new schedule for our work in the next few months up until the beginning of September, where we'd look at so today's economic, the first discussion. May 3rd is the second discussion when we're going to look at a draft document. Then May 16th is a public hearing on the housing chapter. And then urbanization chapter policy discussion.
So, yeah, go ahead. So that's where I got a little bit confused because
same here.
I got to be honest with you guys. 4-hour meetings twice a month is really hard on me and my family. Like, I'm missing all my kids' bedtimes. I barely get dinner. It's rough. And so when I saw Pat's revised thing, it said, okay, keep the faith, another month of double meetings, and then we're going to space it out to one meeting a month for the summer. And I thought, oh, that sounds great. When I looked down at this plan here, it actually has us going 2 meetings a month right on up all the way through summer.
Yeah.
So I was a little confused there, and that sounds like it's the same thing you were wondering about.
Well, similar, but yes, that was worth discussing.
So I know we have a lot of stuff we want to get through, and I'm all for productivity. That sounds great, but the 2 meetings a month thing right on through the summer is going to be really hard.
Yeah, I feel like the May 16th meeting, it seems like the housing chapter public hearing is enough in and of itself for a meeting.
Yeah, well, he did say that it's going to be going to one, in the body of the memo, going to one a month in the summer, but
then didn't.
then didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Especially the summer,
Right.
kids are home. So maybe he should relook at that.
The other thing that I was going to suggest, kind of mixed in with this, is that there are times when we have really efficient meetings, and a lot of those have to do with us talking about things that we've thought at length about in advance, maybe written something down about, and had a chance to consider other people's opinions and things in advance. And all of those things, because they're in writing, can actually be published with the meeting packet if we do our homework, and give the public a chance to see what we're referring to, what we're rebuttaling or whatever. There might be some way for us to mix, the long in-person meetings where we kind of go item by item with the relatively short ones where we just agree what we're gonna do next and then submit our thoughts in writing. And the thoughts in writing could even be read aloud at the next meeting. But I tell you, if I was required to every other meeting, put all of my thoughts for that meeting in writing and then read them, I would read you, 60 seconds and that would be it. And if I'm talking for 30. And there's 6 of us.
That's how we get stuff done, though.
So we're kind of all over the map here. Do you have any initial response to that before I pile on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, just looking through this, and I'll say first out, I didn't kind of go through this with Pat. We talked briefly and about updating the schedule, and then he took it from there. But I'll have a conversation with Pat. I'm thinking economy chapter now, economy chapter May 3rd. We'll get the hearing set. May 16th is the housing chapter public hearing, and then we'll have deliberation and recommendation on the housing chapter.
Right.
So we can send that forward. So instead of urbanization chapter policy discussion, we'll scratch that.
Yeah.
And we'll do economy chapter deliberation and recommendation. June 7th, economy chapter public hearing, followed by economy chapter deliberation and recommendation.
Yeah.
And then June 7th, we'll start urbanization. So that'll be our initial policy discussion on urbanization.
What date we'll start?
June
urbanization?
20th,
June 20th. Okay.
instead of the rezoning map
Yeah.
amendments.
So that's 2 of them then in June.
Should the
Well, or we
rezoning,
we can bump it to the July 5th one, it'd be fine, which is a day after a holiday, which may not find a lot of people here.
Yeah, what day of the week is that?
That is Wednesday. I believe July 5th is a Wednesday.
The 4th is a Monday, I think that's right.
July 5th is a Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay.
Yeah.
So maybe that June 20th is in lieu of the July 5th one.
Mm-hmm.
You'd rather meet June 20th than July 5th?
Well, doesn't the website say we normally meet on the 3rd
Yes, the third Monday is your normal
as the normal meeting,
publicized day.
which is the end of the month meeting instead of the beginning of the month meeting?
Yeah.
So we'll scratch July
I would
5th.
recommend if you're going to scratch any dates that you try to scratch the first one.
Yeah,
Right.
that makes sense.
And yeah, I think we'd all appreciate not
Just
having a
keep the
meeting on
public-
July 5th.
can
Yeah.
the rezoning be pushed out a
Well,
bit?
and that was what I was going to pile on with.
Well,
So
so we'll do urbanization in June. And then he's got a July 20th, which we won't do. Well, we'll do the July 20th, or the urbanization again. Public hearing August 15th for urbanization.
Yeah. And I think,
Well, if we go to one a month, will we still have 2 of them in June? Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, because we don't want to hold that. Well,
I would propose that we would try to do the 2 in June to get the economy out of the way.
the economy will be done. Yeah, when we could not do the June 7th and just do economy public hearing on June 20th.
So my question before we get too far into this, though, is as much, I think the whole rezoning and map amendments is probably my favorite thing to do on the Planning Commission. That's what we'd all like to get to. But I'm curious why it's in the schedule now for the summer.
I think that because the intent was to try to do urbanization in May and June, finish it up first part of July,
Mhm.
and then we can get into the rezoning kind of intermittent with the urbanization, so we can kind of get to a little bit sooner.
Okay.
There's some low hanging fruit with the rezoning that I think
Right.
Pat is a little more anxious to get to.
That's what I was curious, if there was something there specific that, because I feel like the big discussion on that rezoning map could be the meatiest thing that we have to chew on for this whole process,
I
right?
really like that being on there.
The urbanization.
I'm just not sure that middle of summer is the best time for it.
Yeah, the urbanization is going to, I don't know that we'll be there. I mean, on
Right.
this schedule, we're doing urbanization in July, urbanization in August.
Yeah.
And a public hearing for urbanization, either that August or September meeting. And so we're not starting rezoning until September or October.
it would be really cool if before we did the rezoning, and even if we pushed it to September, October, if we had a night when we could just walk around town with Pat and just look at things and talk about things, so we're actually have everything fresh and personal in our memory before we go look at a map and make a bunch of changes.
Kind of have to bear in mind that's a public meeting.
It'd be a few of us at
Yeah.
a time.
We can do it publicly. I mean, we can do it on, I volunteer to push a wheelchair if there's somebody who's handicapped. I mean, I'm sure there's a way of making it happen.
I think what we could do is probably have him put together a list of locations to look at, which everyone could go look at. Maybe not as a group, but you could go.
Yeah, we can talk through it a little bit as we get a little bit closer, but what I'm hearing from
It's a
you
good
is,
idea, though.
are you
It
good
sounds
with
like
the
fun.
2 meetings
We can
in
do it.
June, just to try to get through?
Fine.
Well, either way, I guess. I mean, we can start urbanization in July and just finish up the economy chapter and our regular June 20th meeting.
I would propose we go ahead and schedule the 2 in June, and then if we have a protest or a revolt, we can revisit, but
Go to one a month, just go to our regular third Monday starting in July.
If my preference would be to go to our regular 1 meeting a month starting in June.
Yeah, kids are out of school June 10th, I think is graduation. I think kids are out the 16th, 15th or 16th or something.
Or for the second meeting
Yeah.
in June, schedule something really boring that I have no interest in and you guys don't want to hear my input on, and I'll just skip that one.
we'll have a 10-minute meeting until June 20th.
Well, it'd be
Yeah, that'll be the 10-minute one.
based on this, it'd be the economy chapter, public hearing, and the deliberation and recommendation.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So we can either do
the
it June-
economy, why wouldn't that be June 7th? Oh, if we only had one in June.
If we only had one in June, instead of where it
Yeah.
says there on June 7th, we would just do that on June 20th. So economy at the next meeting, the housing, public hearing and a recommendation at the May 16th meeting. And then we could either meet again in June and have the public hearing, or we could just wait till June 17th or June 20th and have the public hearing on the economy and come up with a final deliberation recommendation of the council. So whatever you'd like to do.
Why don't I put out a poll as preference for June?
Okay.
Would that work, Chris?
Yep.
Well, I-
I polled everybody.
It'd be good to hear from
I'll send an
from
email out and see
Gianna
what you
and
said.
Dan and everybody.
I guess I'm thinking that, I do have a desire to kind of push the agenda too and make things continue to keep happening. Could, instead of a poll, we could just maybe put out all these dates and people could say they're not going to be there.
If
You
it's
know,
just
I
me,
mean, if
like,
we ask them if they want to be there in the longest day of the year, most people are going to say
I
no.
respect you wanting to push this thing through, and if I was in a different situation, I'd be in the exact same boat. If it's just me, then I can miss the second one of that month. I've already had a say in most of this stuff, and we can continue to push through, especially if I know that it's starting in July, it's gonna be 1 meeting a month.
Why don't we do this, Joseph? We'll revamp this with what we've talked about. We'll leave the 2 June dates on that, send it to everybody,
Mhm.
and then let's see what Gianna and Van and you and have to say. And you may not be in the minority, you may be in the majority. And so let's just put
Okay,
it out there and see where we're at.
sounds great.
But this is good work. It's not easy work. It's a lot of thinking through things, and there's, again, obviously a lot of material to go through. So I appreciate all of your efforts, and I will try to do my part in pulling it together and getting a good draft out to you by the next meeting. Thanks for your input.
Thank you.